Welcome back to Wolf Heart Tales, my devoted pack. Tonight, I'm bringing you a story that will leave your heart racing and your soul crying out for more. A tale of forbidden love that defies ancient curses, betrayal that cuts deeper than silver, and a destiny written in starlight itself. This is the story of Aria Nightingale, a brilliant young she-wolf whose heart was shattered on what should have been her most perfect night, and Phoenix Blackthorne, a mysterious professor hiding secrets that could reshape the supernatural world forever. Their love will break ancient magic, challenge the laws of their kind, and prove that sometimes the most forbidden connections are the ones worth fighting for. Before we dive into this epic journey through heartbreak and healing, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because trust me, you won't want to miss a single moment of this supernatural romance. Give this video a thumbs up if you're ready to believe in love that conquers all, and share it with your pack so they can experience this magic too. Now dim those lights, grab your favorite blanket, and let me transport you to a world where mate bonds can be broken but true love cannot, where curses span generations but hope endures forever, and where sometimes the greatest power in the universe is simply the courage to love against impossible odds. This is a story of two souls destined to find each other across time, betrayal, and ancient magic. This is the story of how love became the key to breaking the unbreakable. Are you ready to howl at the moon with me? Then let's begin. Chapter 1. The night everything shattered. The bass from the party 3 floors below vibrated through Aria Nightingale's apartment like a heartbeat, thrumming against the hardwood floors as she stood before her full-length mirror, adjusting the flowing fabric of her midnight blue dress one final time. The silk hugged her curves perfectly, its color bringing out the silver flecks in her storm-gray eyes that would soon be filled with tears she couldn't yet imagine shedding. Tonight was supposed to be perfect. Tonight marked 2 years since Darian Wolfsbane's wolf had first recognized her as his destined mate during their freshman year at Shadowmere Academy. 2 years of believing she'd found her forever, her other half, the one person in all the supernatural realms who would never betray her. How beautifully naive she had been. Aria's fingers trembled slightly as she clasped the delicate silver necklace around her throat, a gift from Darian just last month, when he'd whispered promises of eternity against her skin. Her inner wolf, Luna, stirred restlessly beneath her human facade, sensing something her conscious mind refused to acknowledge. The approaching full moon always made her more sensitive, more aware of the supernatural currents that flowed like invisible rivers through their world. The clock on her nightstand read 8:47 p.m. Darian should have arrived 17 minutes ago to escort her to La Lumière Eternelle, the most exclusive restaurant in the city, where he'd made reservations months in advance for their anniversary celebration. Her manicured fingers hovered over her phone, hesitating. He was probably just caught in traffic, delayed by some pack business that demanded the attention of a future alpha. Being mated to the heir of the Shadowmere pack came with certain complications. Darian's life was structured around duty, responsibility, and the weight of leadership that would one day rest entirely on his broad shoulders. She understood this, accepted it, even admired the way he carried himself with such natural authority. But understanding didn't make waiting any easier. The party music from below grew louder, and Aria could feel the energy of dozens of supernatural beings celebrating whatever milestone had brought them together tonight. Her enhanced hearing picked out laughter, clinking glasses, and beneath it all, the subtle undertone of power that always surrounded gatherings of their kind. Werewolves, she realized, along with what felt like a few vampires, and perhaps even a witch or two. Luna paced within her, growing more agitated with each passing minute. Something was wrong. The mate bond that connected her to Darian felt strange. Not broken, but stretched thin, like a guitar string pulled too tight and ready to snap. By 9:15, she'd left 2 voicemails and sent 4 texts, each one more concerned than the last. Their dinner reservation was definitely lost now, but that hardly mattered compared to the growing dread that was settling in her chest like a cold stone. Her phone finally buzzed, and she lunged for it with desperate relief, only to find a Snapchat notification from her friend Celeste instead of the explanation she desperately needed from Darian. She almost ignored it entirely until she saw the preview message. OMG Aria, isn't this Darian's car? With hands that shook so badly, she could barely tap the screen, Aria opened the snap. The image showed a familiar black Audi R8 parked outside Midnight Eclipse, the hottest nightclub in the supernatural district downtown. In the next photo, taken through the club's floor-to-ceiling windows, she could make out Darian's distinctive broad shoulders and the tribal tattoo that wrapped around his neck like a collar, the mark of future alpha leadership. He wasn't alone. The woman pressed against him had her arms wrapped around his neck, her long golden hair catching the strobe lights as she molded her body to his with unmistakable intimacy. Even through the blur of distance and photography, Aria recognized her immediately. Seraphina Darkmoor, daughter of the Alpha King himself, heiress to the most powerful werewolf dynasty in North America. The phone slipped from nerveless fingers, clattering to the hardwood floor as Aria's world tilted on its axis. Luna howled in anguish within her, the sound echoing through her soul even though no audible noise passed her lips. This had to be a mistake. Some terrible misunderstanding that would have a perfectly reasonable explanation. But even as she told herself this, even as she grabbed her keys and summoned a rideshare with fingers that felt disconnected from her body, a part of her, the part that had been raised on stories of werewolf politics and arranged alliances, whispered the truth she wasn't ready to face. The 20-minute ride to Midnight Eclipse felt like an eternity. Aria pressed herself against the window of the sedan, watching the city lights blur past as her driver navigated the late evening traffic. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass, pale, stricken, beautiful in the way that tragedy makes beautiful things even more heartbreaking. Luna was going wild inside her, clawing to get out, to run, to shift and disappear into the night rather than face whatever truth awaited her at the club. But Aria held her wolf in check with the iron discipline that 2 decades of life in the supernatural world had taught her. Whatever was happening, whatever explanation Darian had, she would face it with dignity. The bouncer at Midnight Eclipse recognized her immediately. Being the future alpha's mate had its perks in the supernatural community, and waved her past the line of hopeful humans who had no idea they were trying to gain entry to a club that catered primarily to creatures of myth and shadow. Inside, the air was thick with supernatural pheromones, the scent of predators and power mingling with expensive alcohol and the kind of desperation that only came out after midnight. The dance floor pulsed with bodies moving to music that seemed to throb with its own primal energy, and everywhere she looked, Aria could see the telltale signs of barely contained wildness that marked her kind. She found them in the VIP section, elevated above the main floor like some twisted tableau of betrayal. Darian had Seraphina pressed against the wall of their private booth, his hands on her waist, his lips trailing down the graceful column of her throat. The sight hit Aria like a physical blow, stealing her breath and making her knees buckle. The mate bond between them stretched, then snapped like a rubber band, sending shockwaves of agony through her entire nervous system. Luna's howl of pain and rage was so intense that several nearby supernatural beings turned to stare, their enhanced senses picking up the psychic scream of a bond being severed. Darian. Her voice cut through the music and conversation like a blade. He turned, and for just a moment, she saw something flicker in his golden eyes. Surprise, perhaps even regret. But it was gone so quickly she might have imagined it, replaced by a coldness that made her blood freeze in her veins. Seraphina's laugh was like silver bells dipped in poison. Oh, how deliciously dramatic. Did you really think he'd still want you when he could have me? She pressed closer to Darian, her perfectly manicured hand sliding possessively across his chest. I'm an Alpha King's daughter, darling. You're just you. The words hit harder than any physical blow could have. Aria felt something break inside her chest, something deeper and more fundamental than her heart. The mate bond that had defined her for 2 years was dissolving like sugar in rain, leaving her feeling hollow and untethered. Darian, she whispered, hating how broken her voice sounded. What is she talking about? Today is our anniversary. We had plans, we had. The packs are merging, Aria. His voice was formal, distant, as if he were addressing a stranger rather than the woman who had shared his bed, his dreams, his very soul for 2 years. This union with Serafina, it's what's best for everyone. What's best for both our peoples. The casual way he said it, as if their entire relationship had been nothing more than a pleasant distraction, made her stagger backward. Best for everyone? What about what we had? What about the mate bond? You told me I was your destiny. Serafina's smile was razor-sharp with triumph. Oh, sweet little Aria. Didn't anyone ever tell you that destiny sometimes needs a little adjustment? She pulled something from her purse, a small crystal vial filled with shimmering purple liquid. Daddy's been working on this merger for months. The bond-severing potion was just the first step. The world seemed to stop. Bond-severing potions were illegal, forbidden by every supernatural treaty in existence. They were considered one of the darkest forms of magical manipulation, capable of destroying the most sacred connections that existed between their kind. You drugged me, Aria breathed, understanding crashing over her like a wave. Both of us. You made him forget. Oh no, darling. Serafina's laugh was genuinely delighted now. The potion doesn't make anyone forget. It just removes inconvenient obstacles. Darian remembers exactly how he felt about you. He just doesn't care anymore. Do you, baby? Darian's golden eyes met Aria's, and in them she saw the truth that shattered her completely. No regret, no lingering love, just a cold calculation that weighed her against his future and found her wanting. I'm sorry, Aria, he said, and she could tell that he genuinely meant it, the same way someone might genuinely regret having to put down a beloved pet. But this is happening. The ceremony is tomorrow night. Serafina will be my mate, and you need to accept that and move on. The ceremony. They were talking about a public mate bonding ceremony, the most sacred ritual in werewolf culture, where 2 souls would be joined before their combined packs as witnesses. Tomorrow night, while she was still bleeding from the wounds of tonight's betrayal, Darian would stand before hundreds of their kind and pledge his eternal soul to another. Aria's phone buzzed in her purse, another Snapchat notification. With numb fingers, she pulled it out and opened the message from Celeste. The image made her blood turn to ice water in her veins. It was a formal pack announcement, elaborately designed with gold lettering and the combined crests of both the Shadowmere and Darkmoor dynasties. Pack merger celebration. Witness the sacred mate bond ceremony between future Alpha Darian Wolfsbane and Princess Serafina Darkmoor, daughter of Alpha King Marcus Darkmoor. Tomorrow night at the Moonrise Amphitheater. The date stamp on the announcement was from 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks. While she'd been planning their anniversary dinner, picking out the perfect dress, believing in their love, the man she'd given her heart had been planning to replace her. The mate bond ceremony she'd dreamed of having with him was going to happen, just with someone else wearing the crown that should have been hers. As Aria stood there, her perfect dress now feeling like a costume for a play that had ended without her knowledge, she didn't notice the 3 pairs of glowing red eyes watching her from the shadows near the club's exit. She was too lost in her heartbreak to sense the danger approaching, too devastated by betrayal to realize that predators had caught the scent of a broken, vulnerable she-wolf with no pack to protect her. The rogues had been waiting for exactly this kind of opportunity, and they were moving closer. Chapter 2. Blood and Shadows. The first blow came from behind, sending Aria stumbling forward into the brick wall of the alley behind Midnight Eclipse. Her phone shattered against the pavement, the screen exploding into a spider web of cracks that reflected the neon lights from the street like a broken kaleidoscope. Through her tear-blurred vision and the haze of emotional devastation, she made out 3 figures emerging from the shadows. Rogues. Werewolves without pack allegiance, without honor, without the moral constraints that kept their kind from becoming the monsters that humans feared in their darkest nightmares. Their eyes glowed crimson in the darkness, a sign that they had given themselves over completely to their wolf nature, abandoning the careful balance between human and beast that defined civilized, supernatural society. The largest of the 3, a mountain of muscle and scar tissue, smiled with teeth that were already shifting into fangs. Well, well, he sneered, his voice carrying the rough growl of a wolf barely contained within human vocal cords. If it isn't Darien Wolfsbane's little mate. Or should I say, ex-mate. The scent of cigarettes and something darker, blood, violence, death, rolled off him in waves. Aria's wolf Luna snarled within her, but the severed mate bond had left them both weakened, off balance. The magical poisoning that had dissolved her connection to Darien had also disrupted her ability to shift cleanly. I heard about your little situation, the rogue continued, circling her like a predator playing with wounded prey. Pack merger, new mate, all very political. Your precious alpha-to-be, and his daddy killed 3 of our pack members last month. Called it territory enforcement. His eyes flashed with malicious glee. Now we get to return the favor. Aria tried to back away, but the alley was a dead end. Brick walls on 3 sides, rogues blocking her only escape route. Her enhanced hearing picked up the distant sound of music from the club, laughter, and conversation from people who had no idea that just 50 feet away, she was about to die. I'm not part of his pack anymore, she said, hating how her voice shook, but unable to stop it. The adrenaline was making her hands tremble, and Luna was clawing at her consciousness, desperate to shift and fight despite their weakened state. Oh, but you were, the second rogue chimed in, stepping closer with predatory grace. And that's enough for us. Besides, a rejected mate makes such perfect prey. No pack bonds to call for help, no alpha to come running to the rescue. The third rogue, smaller but with eyes that held the flat, empty gaze of a true killer, tilted his head like a curious dog. I can smell your wolf's pain from here. Broken bonds leave such a distinctive scent. Like flowers left too long in the sun, beautiful, but rotting. Aria's training kicked in then, years of self-defense classes that her parents had insisted upon, knowing that their daughter would one day be part of the dangerous political landscape of supernatural society. She lunged forward, her stiletto heel connecting solidly with the large rogue's knee. He howled in pain and fury, stumbling backward, but his companions were already moving. Strong hands grabbed her arms, claws extending from fingertips to dig into her flesh through the delicate fabric of her anniversary dress. The silk tore like tissue paper, and she felt warm blood begin to flow down her arms. That wasn't very nice, the leader snarled, his partial shift making his voice deeper, more inhuman. We were going to make this quick, but now I think we'll take our time. Make sure the great Darien Wolfsbane gets a very clear message about what happens to people who cross the Crimson Brotherhood. The first punch caught her in the ribs, driving the air from her lungs and sending sharp spikes of agony through her chest. The second split her lip, filling her mouth with the metallic taste of her own blood. By the third, her legs could no longer support her weight, and she collapsed to the dirty alley floor, her beautiful dress now torn and stained with blood and grime. They were right about one thing. The severed mate bond had left her wolf too weak to shift properly. Luna struggled to take control, to transform them into something that could fight back, but the magical disruption in her system made it impossible. Every time her wolf tried to emerge, it felt like trying to grab smoke with bare hands. Through the growing haze of pain and the metallic taste of blood, Aria heard new voices approaching from the mouth of the alley. Human voices, by the sound of it, a couple arguing about which restaurant to try next. The rogues heard them too. The leader cursed under his breath in the old tongue, then grabbed Aria by the throat with claws that were now fully extended. Finish it, he ordered his companions. Now. She felt razor-sharp talons pierce the skin over her ribs, preparing to tear through flesh and muscle to reach her heart. This was how it would end, not in some glorious battle or peaceful old age, but bleeding out in an alley behind a nightclub while the man she'd loved celebrated their destroyed bond with another woman. Luna made one final, desperate attempt to surface, and for a moment Aria felt the familiar burning sensation of an impending shift. But then something else happened, a flash of silver light that seemed to come from nowhere, followed by the sound of vicious snarling that definitely wasn't coming from her. A massive wolf burst into the alley like a living thunderstorm, its fur so dark it seemed to absorb the neon light around it. This wasn't like any wolf she'd ever seen. It was huge, easily the size of a small horse, with markings that seemed to shift and shimmer in the artificial light. But most striking were its eyes, not the golden amber typical of their kind, but a deep, burning silver that seemed to hold ancient secrets. The wolf moved with deadly precision, taking down the first rogue before the criminal even realized what was happening. Powerful jaws clamped down on the man's throat, cutting off his scream before it could begin. The second rogue tried to run but found his path blocked by a blur of midnight fur and flashing teeth. The leader, seeing his companions fall, made a desperate grab for Aria. If he was going down, he'd take the prize with him. But the mysterious wolf was already there, placing itself protectively between them with a growl that seemed to shake the very foundations of the surrounding buildings. "Impossible," the rogue whispered, his red eyes wide with something that might have been recognition. "The Valana wolves died out centuries ago. You can't be." He never got to finish the sentence. The great wolf lunged forward with fluid grace, and then there was only silence. As quickly as it had begun, the violence was over. The three rogues lay motionless on the alley floor, and Aria found herself staring into those incredible silver eyes, her heart pounding for more than just the adrenaline of survival. The wolf approached her slowly, carefully, as if afraid she might flee. When it was close enough to touch, it lowered its great head and began to shift, bones cracking and reforming, fur receding into human skin, the massive frame condensing into a tall, powerfully built man. He was beautiful in the way that dangerous things are beautiful, all sharp angles and contained power, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and those same impossible silver eyes. He wore expensive clothes that had somehow survived his transformation perfectly, and when he spoke, his voice carried an authority that made her wolf sit up and take notice. "Are you injured?" he asked, kneeling beside her without seeming to care that the alley floor would ruin his clearly expensive suit. His hands hovered over her wounds, not quite touching but radiating a warmth that seemed to ease some of her pain. I think so," she managed, trying to take inventory of her injuries. Everything hurt, but nothing seemed to be broken. "Who are you?" What were those things about Valana wolves? Something flickered across his handsome features, surprise, maybe, or concern. "You're bleeding," he said instead of answering, pulling a pristine white handkerchief from his jacket pocket. "We need to get you medical attention." As he gently pressed the cloth to the cuts on her arms, Aria caught his scent, sandalwood and something wilder, like storms over ancient forests. Luna stirred within her, responding to his presence in a way she'd never experienced before. Not the instant recognition of a mate bond. Those could only form once in a lifetime, but something deeper, more primal. "The hospital will ask questions," she said, trying to think through the fog of pain and shock. "Questions I can't answer without revealing what we are." He nodded, understanding immediately. "I know a place. Somewhere safe, where they treat our kind." His silver eyes met hers, and she saw something there that made her breath catch, a pain that matched her own, though from what source, she couldn't guess. "Do you trust me?" She should say no. Everything her parents had taught her about supernatural politics screamed that trusting a strange wolf, especially one with the kind of power she'd just witnessed, was dangerous beyond measure. But Luna was practically purring in his presence, and her human instincts, battered as they were, recognized something fundamentally good in him. "I don't even know your name," she whispered. He helped her to her feet with gentle strength, steadying her when her legs threatened to give out. "Phoenix," he said simply. "Phoenix Blackthorne." As he wrapped his jacket around her shoulders, enveloping her in his scent and warmth, Aria had no idea that she'd just met the one person in all the supernatural realms who could help her heal from the devastation of this night. She also had no idea that Phoenix Blackthorne carried secrets that would soon turn both their worlds upside down. The last thing she remembered before exhaustion and shock finally claimed her was the sound of sirens in the distance, and the feeling of strong arms lifting her as if she weighed nothing at all. Chapter 3. Sanctuary in Silver. Beep. Beep, beep. The steady rhythm of a heart monitor pulled Aria back to consciousness like a rope dragging her up from the depths of a dark ocean. Everything hurt, a dull, throbbing ache that seemed to emanate from every cell in her body, but it was the kind of pain that spoke of healing rather than dying. She tried to open her eyes, but only one responded. The other was swollen shut, a reminder of the rogue's vicious assault. Through her limited vision, she could make out a room that definitely wasn't any hospital she'd ever seen. The walls were a soothing cream color, decorated with what looked like original artwork, and the bed she lay in was more luxurious than anything she'd experienced even at the finest hotels. "Easy, sweetheart," a gentle female voice said from somewhere to her right. "You're safe now, but you need to take it slow. Your body has been through quite an ordeal." Aria turned her head carefully, wincing at the movement, and saw a woman with kind eyes and silver-streaked auburn hair sitting beside her bed. She wore scrubs, but they were a soft lavender color rather than the harsh institutional white of most medical facilities. Behind her stood a tall man with graying temples, his posture radiating the quiet authority that marked him as someone accustomed to being in charge. "I'm Dr. Elena Moonwhisper," the woman said with a warm smile, "and this is my mate, Alpha James Ironwood. Phoenix brought you to our PAX medical facility 3 days ago." 3 days. She'd been unconscious for 3 days. The memory of the attack came flooding back. The rogues, the pain, the mysterious wolf with silver eyes who had saved her life. Phoenix Blackthorne. "Where is he?" she asked, her voice coming out as barely more than a whisper. Her throat felt like she'd been gargling with sandpaper. "Phoenix." Dr. Moonwhisper helped her sip some water from a cup with a straw, the cool liquid soothing her damaged throat. "He's been here every day, checking on your progress. I had to practically force him to go home and rest, if I'm being honest. That man was wearing a hole in my floor with all his pacing." Alpha Ironwood stepped forward, his expression gentle despite the obvious power he carried. "The rogues who attacked you," he said in a voice that rumbled like distant thunder, "they won't be hurting anyone else. We've been tracking that particular pack for months. They've been terrorizing lone wolves and unmated females throughout the territory." Aria closed her eyes, trying to process everything. The attack, Phoenix's rescue, being brought to what was apparently another PAX medical facility. In the supernatural world, such generosity between strangers was rare. PAX typically looked after their own and left outsiders to fend for themselves. "Why?" she asked. "Why did you help me? I'm not part of your pack." Dr. Moonwhisper and her mate exchanged a look that seemed to carry an entire conversation. Finally, the doctor spoke. "Because everyone deserves compassion, dear one. Especially those who have been betrayed by the people who should have protected them." The words hit harder than they should have. These strangers knew about Darian, about the severed mate bond, about her complete humiliation at midnight eclipse. The thought of her private pain being public knowledge made her want to crawl under the expensive bedding and disappear. "We know who you are, Aria Nightingale," Alpha Ironwood said gently, apparently reading her distress. "News of the Shadowmere Darkmoor merger has spread throughout the supernatural community. What happened to you? It wasn't right. Bond-severing potions are forbidden for good reason." "The pack ceremony," she said suddenly, panic rising in her chest. "Did they? Has it already?" "Yesterday evening," Dr. Moonwhisper confirmed softly. "I'm sorry, dear. But perhaps this is your chance for a new beginning. Away from all the political maneuvering and pack alliances that treat people like chess pieces to be moved around the board. A new beginning." The words should have been comforting, but instead they felt like a death sentence. Everything she'd built her life around, her relationship with Darian, her place in Shadowmere pack hierarchy, her dreams of becoming a Luna, all of it was gone. She was a lone wolf now, packless and mateless, vulnerable to every predator and power play in their dangerous world. "You don't have to decide anything right now," Alpha Ironwood said, as if reading her spiraling thoughts. "But know that you have a place here, with the Moonrise Pack, for as long as you need it. We take care of our own, and that includes strays who find their way to our door. Over the following 2 weeks, Aria discovered what it meant to be part of a pack that actually functioned like a family rather than a corporate hierarchy. The Moonrise Pack was different from anything she'd experienced in the Shadowmere territory. Here, strength was measured not just in physical power or political connections, but in loyalty, compassion, and the willingness to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Dr. Moonwhisper, Elena, as she insisted Aria call her, became like the mother she'd never really had. Her own parents were decent people, but they'd always been more concerned with maintaining their position in pack society than nurturing their daughter's emotional well-being. Elena, by contrast, seemed genuinely invested in Aria's healing, both physical and psychological. The bruises have faded beautifully, Elena said during one of their morning checkups, examining the places where the rogue's claws had torn through her skin. Werewolf healing is remarkable, but the emotional wounds, those take longer. It was true. While her body had recovered with supernatural efficiency, her heart still felt like it had been put through a shredder. Every time she thought about Darian, about the ceremony she hadn't attended, about Seraphina wearing the crown that should have been hers, the pain was fresh as if it had just happened. "I feel so stupid," she confessed one afternoon as she sat in Elena's garden, watching the doctor tend to a patch of healing herbs that grew wild and beautiful in the afternoon sunlight. "I actually believed he loved me. I thought our bond was real, that it meant something." "It was real," Elena said firmly, her hands never pausing in their gentle cultivation of the plants. "What you felt, what you shared, that was genuine, Aria. The fact that it was artificially severed doesn't diminish what you experienced. It just means that someone else made the choice to destroy something beautiful for political gain." "Then why does it hurt so much to know he's with her now? If it was just magic, just a potion that made him stop caring, shouldn't I be able to get over it?" Elena sat back on her heels, studying Aria with eyes that held decades of wisdom. "Because love isn't just about mate bonds, dear one. Yes, the mystical connection between destined mates is powerful, but what you're grieving isn't just the loss of supernatural bonding. You're grieving the loss of 2 years of shared experiences, inside jokes, quiet moments, dreams you built together. You're grieving the future you thought you'd have. Those things were real, and losing them hurts regardless of magic." That evening, as Aria sat in the pack house's modern kitchen sharing tea with Elena, her phone chimed with an email notification. She almost ignored it. Most of her messages these days were from former pack members offering awkward condolences or thinly veiled curiosity about her situation. But this one made her hands shake as she read it. "I got in," she whispered, staring at the screen in disbelief. "Elena, I got in." "Got in where, dear?" "Ravenscroft Institute of Advanced Technology. I applied months ago for their graduate program in supernatural cybersecurity. It's one of the most prestigious tech academies in the country." She reread the acceptance letter, hardly believing the words. "Full scholarship. They're offering me a full scholarship." Elena's face lit up with genuine joy. "Aria, that's wonderful. This could be exactly what you need. A chance to focus on your passion, to build something that's entirely yours." But even as excitement bubbled up in her chest for the first time in weeks, doubt crept in alongside it. "It's in the same city," she said quietly. "Ravenscroft is only 20 miles from Shadowmere territory. What if I run into them? What if? What if you show them exactly how much better off you are without their political games?" Alpha Ironwood's voice came from the doorway, where he'd apparently been listening with the enhanced hearing that came with his rank. "Aria, you can't let them control your future. This is your dream school, isn't it?" It was. She'd been following Ravenscroft's groundbreaking research in magical technological integration for years. Their cybersecurity program was legendary, producing graduates who went on to protect supernatural communities from both digital and mystical threats. Getting accepted had been a long shot. She'd only applied because her academic advisor had insisted she reach for the stars. Besides, Elena added with a mischievous smile, it's a huge campus in a major metropolitan area. The chances of randomly running into your ex-mate are practically negligible. As it turned out, the moon goddess had a twisted sense of humor when it came to practically negligible chances. 1 week later, as Aria stood outside her new apartment building near Ravenscroft's campus with her keys in hand, her phone buzzed with a news alert. Breaking news. Princess Serafina Darkmoor Wolfsbane enrolls late at Ravenscroft Institute. Sources confirm her entry into Advanced Business Management program. Aria stared at the notification, torn between laughing and crying. Of course. Of course Serafina would end up at the same school, probably using her new mate's political connections to secure a spot in whatever program would best serve her family's business interests. The universe, it seemed, wasn't done testing her yet. But as she looked up at her new apartment building, sleek, modern, and completely hers, Aria felt something she hadn't experienced since that terrible night at midnight eclipse. Hope. Let Serafina come. Let the whole supernatural world watch and whisper and judge. Aria Nightingale was done being a victim of other people's political games. It was time to write her own story. Chapter 4. The Professor's Secret. Ravenscroft Institute of Advanced Technology rose from the heart of the city, like a monument to the future itself. Glass and steel towers stretched toward the sky, their surfaces gleaming with integrated solar panels and mystical energy collectors that hummed with barely audible power. Students moved between buildings on elevated walkways that seemed to float in midair, supported by a combination of advanced engineering and carefully woven levitation spells. Aria stood in the main courtyard on her first day, clutching her class schedule and trying not to feel overwhelmed by the sheer scope of the place. Everything here was cutting edge, from the holographic directory displays to the students casually carrying tablets that interfaced directly with their neural implants. This was where the supernatural world's brightest minds came to push the boundaries between magic and technology. Her first class was Advanced Mystical Cybersecurity, taught by someone called Professor P. Blackthorne in the Thornfield building. The name made her pause. Blackthorne, like Phoenix Blackthorne, the mysterious wolf who had saved her life. But it had to be a coincidence. Phoenix hadn't struck her as the academic type, despite his obvious intelligence and refined manner. The Thornfield building was a masterpiece of modern architecture, all flowing lines and impossible angles that seemed to shift slightly when she wasn't looking directly at them. Mystical architecture designed to house the kind of advanced magical research that required specialized containment fields. Room 347 was easy enough to find, though the hallway leading to it seemed longer than it should have been given the building's exterior dimensions. Aria slipped into the classroom just as the clock struck 9, taking a seat near the back where she could observe without drawing attention. The room buzzed with conversation as students compared notes from summer internships at various supernatural tech corporations. Aria caught fragments of discussions about quantum encryption spells, digital exorcism protocols, and something called ethereal firewalls that apparently required both coding expertise and significant mystical power to implement effectively. "Quiet down, everyone," a familiar voice said from the front of the room, and Aria's blood froze in her veins. Standing at the professor's desk, looking devastatingly handsome in charcoal slacks and a white button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms, was Phoenix Blackthorne. His silver eyes swept across the classroom with professional authority, and when they landed on her, she saw a flicker of something: surprise, recognition, perhaps even pleasure, before his expression smoothed back into academic neutrality. "Welcome to Advanced Mystical Cybersecurity," he continued, his voice carrying easily through the suddenly silent room. "I'm Professor Blackthorne, and over the next semester, we'll be exploring the intersection between digital security protocols and supernatural protection spells." Aria sank lower in her seat, her mind racing. The man who had saved her from the rogues, who had held her while she recovered from her injuries, who had occupied far too many of her thoughts over the past few weeks, was her professor. This was either the best possible coincidence or the worst possible complication. Professor Blackthorne, she supposed she should think of him that way now, began his lecture with a kind of passionate expertise that made it clear why Ravenscroft had recruited him. He moved through complex concepts with elegant ease, drawing connections between ancient protection wards and modern encryption algorithms that made several students gasp with sudden understanding. The fundamental principle, he explained, sketching a diagram on the smartboard that seemed to glow with its own internal light, is that both digital and mystical security rely on the same core concept: creating barriers that allow authorized access while keeping out unwanted intrusions. The difference is that mystical protections work with energy patterns, while digital security works with mathematical ones. A student in the front row raised her hand. "Professor, what about hybrid threats? Magical attacks that use digital vectors, or cyber attacks enhanced with supernatural elements?" Phoenix's smile was sharp with approval. "Excellent question, Miss Chen. That's exactly what makes this field so critical to our community's survival. Traditional cybersecurity experts can't protect against a virus that's been cursed to evolve beyond its programming. Traditional magical protections can't stop a hacker who's using technomancy to bypass mystical barriers entirely." As the lecture continued, Aria found herself drawn into the subject despite her personal complications. This was exactly why she'd wanted to come to Ravenscroft, to be part of the cutting-edge research that would protect supernatural communities from the increasingly sophisticated threats they faced in the modern world. When Phoenix called for a 15-minute break halfway through the class, students scattered to check their phones and grab coffee from the machines in the hallway. Aria remained in her seat, uncertain whether she should approach him or pretend nothing had happened between them. The decision was taken out of her hands when he appeared beside her desk, moving with the silent grace that marked him as predator despite his academic disguise. "Miss Nightingale," he said formally, though she caught the slight softening around his eyes that suggested he was as affected by their unexpected reunion as she was. "I didn't expect to see you in my classroom." "Professor Blackthorne," she replied, matching his professional tone even as her heart hammered against her ribs. "I didn't know you taught here." Among other things, there was something mysterious in his voice, layers of meaning she couldn't quite parse. "How are you healing?" Dr. Moonwhisper said your recovery was progressing well. The fact that he'd been checking on her progress sent a warm flutter through her chest that she firmly suppressed. This was her professor now, not her mysterious rescuer. Professional boundaries were essential, especially given the scandal that had destroyed her previous life. "Much better, thank you," she said carefully. "The Moonrise Pack has been very kind. They're good people." His silver eyes studied her face with an intensity that made her feel exposed. "Are you planning to stay with them permanently?" I'm not sure yet. This program is my priority right now. Building a career that's mine, independent of pack politics or mate bonds or any of the complications that come with supernatural society." Something shifted in his expression, approval, perhaps, or respect. A wise choice. Education and self-reliance are the best foundations for any life, supernatural or otherwise. Other students were beginning to filter back into the classroom, ending their brief moment of private conversation. But before he walked away, Phoenix leaned slightly closer and lowered his voice. "If you need anything, academic support, professional guidance, or just someone to talk to who understands what it's like to be rebuilding after betrayal, my office hours are posted on the syllabus." The comment about betrayal made her look at him sharply, but he was already moving back to the front of the room, calling the class to order for the second half of their session. For the remainder of the period, Aria tried to focus on the lecture material rather than the way Phoenix's hands moved when he explained complex concepts, or how his voice deepened slightly when he was particularly passionate about a topic, or the way his silver eyes occasionally found hers across the crowded classroom. When class ended, she gathered her things quickly and headed for the door, hoping to avoid any further awkward interactions. She was almost successful, until she heard a commotion in the hallway that made her blood run cold. "Oh my God, it's really her, Seraphina Darkmoor Wolfsbane." The excited whisper came from a cluster of students who had their phones out, clearly hoping to capture photos of the supernatural world's newest celebrity power couple. Aria's steps faltered as she caught sight of perfectly styled golden hair and a designer outfit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Seraphina stood in the center of an admiring crowd, basking in the attention with a kind of practiced grace that came from a lifetime of being treated like royalty. "Being an Alpha King's daughter does have its perks," Seraphina was saying with false modesty. "Daddy made sure my late enrollment wasn't a problem. After all, education is so important for future pack leaders." Aria tried to slip past unnoticed, but supernatural senses were difficult to fool. Seraphina's head turned with predatory precision, golden eyes locking onto her with malicious delight. Well, well, Seraphina's voice carried across the hallway like a whip crack. Look who it is. The charity case. Every conversation in the immediate area stopped. Phones appeared as if by magic, students eager to capture whatever drama was about to unfold. Aria felt trapped in a spotlight she'd never wanted, her carefully constructed new beginning threatening to crumble before it had even properly started. I heard you couldn't handle being rejected, Seraphina continued, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. Had to run away to another pack. How pathetic. Aria's hands clenched into fists at her sides, but she refused to give Seraphina the satisfaction of a public breakdown. Not again. Not after everything she'd been through to get here. I have class, she said quietly, trying to push past the crowd. Oh, don't be shy. Seraphina's laugh was like a broken crystal. I want everyone to meet our little charity student. You see, Aria here thought she was good enough to be a future alpha's mate. Isn't that just adorable? The phones were definitely recording now, students sensing the kind of supernatural drama that would go viral within hours. Aria felt the familiar burn of humiliation rising in her chest, the same sensation she'd experienced that terrible night at Midnight Eclipse. At least I earned my place here, she said, her voice stronger than she felt. I didn't need Daddy's political connections to get accepted. Seraphina's perfect features twisted with momentary rage before smoothing back into cruel amusement. Oh, sweetheart, we both know you're here because of sympathy admissions. Poor little rejected mate, let's give her a scholarship so she can pretend she's special. The words hit like physical blows, but before Aria could respond, a new voice cut through the crowd like a blade. Is there a problem here? Professor Phoenix Blackthorne stood at the edge of the growing crowd, his presence immediately commanding attention. He looked every inch the authority figure, calm, controlled, and utterly unbothered by the social drama unfolding before him. No problem at all, Professor, Seraphina purred, immediately switching to charm mode. Just catching up with an old friend. Phoenix's silver eyes moved between them with calculating intelligence. I see. Well, Miss Nightingale, you don't want to be late for your next class. It was clearly a rescue, professionally delivered but unmistakably protective. Aria shot him a grateful look before pushing through the crowd, eager to escape before things got worse. But as she hurried toward her next classroom, she heard Seraphina's voice behind her, sweet as poison honey. Run along then, charity case. I'm sure we'll see each other around campus very soon. The threat in those words was unmistakable, and Aria realized that her fresh start was about to get significantly more complicated. Behind her, unnoticed by the dispersing crowd, Phoenix Blackthorne watched her retreating figure with eyes that held secrets darker than anyone could imagine. Chapter 5. The Forbidden Kiss. The library became Aria's sanctuary over the following weeks, a place where she could lose herself in research and advanced coding projects while avoiding the social minefield that Ravenscroft's corridors had become. Word of her confrontation with Seraphina had spread through the supernatural student body like wildfire, creating two distinct camps, those who viewed her as a tragic figure deserving of sympathy, and those who saw her as entertainment, a fallen princess whose public humiliation provided delicious gossip. She preferred the quiet corner on the 7th floor, surrounded by ancient texts on mystical programming languages and cutting-edge research papers on technomancy integration. Here, among the smell of old leather and the soft hum of climate control spells, she could pretend that the whispers and stares didn't exist. Professor Blackthorne's advanced mystical cybersecurity class had become both the highlight and the torment of her week. His lectures were brilliant, pushing her to think beyond conventional approaches to supernatural security. But every interaction was charged with an undercurrent of tension that made her hyper-aware of his every movement, every glance, every casual touch when he returned her graded assignments. Exceptional work, Miss Nightingale, he said quietly, sliding her latest project across her desk. His fingers brushed against hers for just a moment, probably an accident, but one that sent electricity shooting up her arm. Your approach to combining protection wards with quantum encryption is innovative. I'd like to discuss it further during office hours. Aria nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Around them, other students were packing up their materials as class ended, but she remained seated, staring at the grade notation on her paper. An A+, with detailed comments written in Phoenix's precise handwriting praising her creative problem-solving and suggesting additional research directions. Miss Nightingale? His voice was closer now, concerned. Are you all right? She looked up to find that the classroom had emptied except for the two of them. Phoenix stood beside her desk, his silver eyes studying her face with an intensity that made her feel simultaneously seen and exposed. I'm fine, she lied, gathering her things with hands that trembled slightly. Just tired. It's been a difficult adjustment, starting over somewhere new. I imagine it has been. There was something in his tone that suggested personal experience with reinvention. Walk with me? It wasn't really a question, and she found herself following him out of the classroom and down a corridor she'd never explored before. They walked in companionable silence until he stopped at a door marked P. Blackthorne Private Office and gestured for her to enter. His office was a study in controlled elegance. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined two walls, filled with volumes that ranged from ancient grimoires to cutting-edge technical manuals. A massive desk dominated the center of the room, its surface organized with military precision. But what caught her attention were the windows. They offered a spectacular view of the city skyline, and more importantly, they were warded with privacy spells so complex that she could feel them humming in the air like invisible music. Please sit, Phoenix said, gesturing to one of the comfortable leather chairs arranged in front of his desk. He settled into the chair beside her rather than behind the desk, eliminating the barrier of authority between them. You wanted to discuss my project? She asked, though something in his demeanor suggested this conversation would cover more than academic topics. Among other things. He leaned back in his chair, studying her with those penetrating silver eyes. How are you really adjusting, Aria? And please don't give me the polite response you'd offer to any other professor. We both know our relationship is more complicated than that. The words hung in the air between them, acknowledging what they'd both been carefully avoiding. She wasn't just another student to him, and he wasn't just another professor to her. The night he'd saved her life had created a connection that transcended normal academic boundaries. It's hard, she admitted, surprising herself with her honesty. Harder than I expected. I thought leaving the packed territories would mean leaving all the politics and judgment behind, but it followed me here. Serafina makes sure of that. Phoenix's expression darkened at the mention of Serafina's name. She's been bothering you? Nothing I can prove. Just comments in the hallway, social media posts that don't quite cross the line into harassment, making sure everyone knows I'm here on charity. Death by 1,000 cuts. She laughed bitterly. The irony is that I actually earned this scholarship. My research, my grades, my competition wins. None of that matters to her. As far as she's concerned, I'm just the reject who needs to be reminded of her place. Your place, Phoenix said quietly, is wherever you choose it to be. You're brilliant, Aria. Your work in my class is graduate level despite being an undergrad course. Your approach to mystical cybersecurity is revolutionary. The praise warmed her more than it should have, coming from someone whose opinion had rapidly become far too important to her peace of mind. Why did you become a professor? She asked, partly to change the subject and partly because she was genuinely curious. You don't seem like the typical academic type. Something flickered across his features. Amusement, perhaps, or irony. Let's just say that teaching wasn't my first career choice. Sometimes life forces us to reinvent ourselves in ways we never expected. What was your first choice? For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he smiled, but it was a sad expression that didn't quite reach his eyes. I was going to do a lot of things. A researcher, a leader, a mate to someone who deserved better than the shadows I carry with me. But the past has a way of catching up with us, and some doors close permanently. The raw honesty in his voice made her chest tighten with sympathy. Here was someone else who understood betrayal, loss, the weight of dreams that would never come true. I'm sorry, she said softly. Whatever happened, I'm sorry. Don't be. It led me here, to this moment, to... He trailed off, but the unfinished sentence hung between them like a promise. The silence stretched, charged with tension that had been building for weeks. Aria was acutely aware of how close they were sitting, how the privacy wards made them completely isolated from the outside world, how Phoenix's scent, sandalwood and storms, was making her wolf restless with longing. This is dangerous, she whispered, though she made no move to leave. I know. His voice was rough, strained with the effort of maintaining control. University policy is clear about faculty-student relationships. My career, your education, we could lose everything. Then we should stop. Right now, before this goes any further. We should. But he leaned closer instead of pulling away, his hand coming up to trace the line of her jaw with fingers that trembled slightly. Tell me to stop, Aria. Tell me to be the professor you need instead of the man who's been losing his mind thinking about you. She should. She knew she should. But instead of pushing him away, she found herself leaning into his touch, her eyes fluttering closed as his thumb brushed across her lower lip. I can't, she breathed. I've tried to forget that night, tried to pretend you're just my professor, but... He kissed her then, cutting off her words with lips that were soft and warm and desperate. It started gentle, hesitant, as if he was giving her the chance to pull away. But when she responded instead, when her hands fisted in his shirt and she kissed him back with all the longing she'd been suppressing, something broke free in both of them. The kiss deepened, and I became hungry, desperate. His hands tangled in her hair, while hers mapped the strong lines of his shoulders, reacquainting themselves with the solid strength that had carried her to safety. She could taste the coffee he'd been drinking, could smell the faint trace of his wolf just beneath his human scent, could feel the careful control he maintained slipping away like sand through fingers. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his eyes had taken on that distinctive silver glow that marked his wolf's presence close to the surface. This is insane, he said, his forehead resting against hers. We can't do this. The risks. I know. But she didn't move away, couldn't bring herself to break the connection between them. We should pretend this didn't happen. Maintain professional boundaries. Protect our futures. Absolutely. His thumb traced her cheekbone with heartbreaking tenderness. This can never happen again. But even as they spoke the words they both knew they should mean, neither of them made any move to separate. The privacy wards hummed around them, creating a bubble of safety in a world that would destroy them both if it knew the truth. Outside, the sun was setting over the city, painting the office in shades of gold and amber that made everything feel like a beautiful dream. And in that moment, surrounded by the growing darkness and the weight of secrets they couldn't share, Aria allowed herself to believe that sometimes love was worth any risk, even if it could cost them everything. A soft chime from Phoenix's computer broke the spell, reminding them both that the real world still existed beyond the sanctuary of his office. With reluctant movements that spoke of genuine regret, they separated, trying to rebuild the professional distance that their kiss had obliterated. You should go, Phoenix said quietly, though his eyes remained fixed on her lips. Before someone notices how long you've been here. She nodded, gathering her bag with hands that weren't entirely steady. At the door, she paused, looking back at him sitting alone in his office with shadows gathering around him like old ghosts. Phoenix, she said softly, whatever happened in your past, whatever doors closed, I'm glad the path led you here. I'm glad you were there that night when I needed saving. So am I, he replied, but his voice held a note of foreboding that sent chills down her spine. So am I. As she walked back through Ravenscroft's corridors toward her apartment, Aria had no way of knowing that their private moment had been witnessed by eyes that saw opportunity in secrets, power in scandal. Serafina Darkmoor Wolfsbane smiled as she reviewed the photos on her phone, images captured through the office window with supernatural clarity, showing Professor Phoenix Blackthorne and the little charity case in a compromising embrace. This was going to be even more fun than she'd hoped. Chapter 6: Secrets and Surveillance. The next 2 weeks passed in a haze of stolen glances and carefully maintained professional distance. Aria threw herself into her coursework with desperate intensity, spending long hours in the library and computer labs, telling herself that academic excellence would distract her from the memory of Phoenix's kiss and the way his silver eyes had burned with suppressed longing. It didn't work. Every Tuesday and Thursday, she sat in his advanced mystical cybersecurity class, hyper-aware of his every movement, every inflection in his voice when he called on her to answer questions. Their interactions were scrupulously professional on the surface. He was the brilliant professor, she was the dedicated student, but underneath ran currents of electricity that made her skin feel too tight and her wolf pace restlessly beneath her human facade. Phoenix seemed to be struggling with the same internal battle. She caught him watching her sometimes when he thought she wasn't looking, his expression unguarded and hungry before he remembered himself and turned back to the whiteboard. When he handed back graded assignments, he was careful not to let their fingers touch, but the effort it took was visible in the tension of his shoulders and the careful way he avoided her eyes. The worst part was how much she'd begun to admire him, not just as the man who'd saved her life, but as an educator and researcher. His approach to mystical cybersecurity was revolutionary, combining ancient protective magic with cutting-edge digital protocols in ways that made her reimagine the entire field. Under his guidance, her own research was reaching new heights of innovation. "Your latest project is extraordinary," he said after class one Thursday, his voice carefully neutral despite the fact that they were alone in the classroom. "The way you've integrated lunar cycle algorithms with firewall architecture, it's genius-level work, Aria." She felt warmth bloom in her chest at his praise, followed immediately by the familiar ache of wanting things she couldn't have. "Thank you, Professor. Your feedback has been invaluable." The formality of their exchange felt like a knife twist, especially when she could see the same longing in his eyes that she felt in her own heart. But they both understood the rules of the game they were playing. Public propriety, private agony. "Have you given any thought to graduate school?" he asked, organizing papers on his desk with movements that seemed calculated to keep his hands busy. "Your work is already at a doctoral level. With the right mentor, you could make groundbreaking contributions to the field." "I've thought about it," she admitted. "But graduate programs require recommendations from faculty members, and I'm not sure." She trailed off, unable to voice what they both knew, that their complicated relationship made such professional support impossible. "You'll have no shortage of recommendations," Phoenix said firmly. "Your talent speaks for itself, regardless of any personal complications." Personal complications. Such a sanitized way to describe the fire that burned between them, the connection that felt deeper than anything she'd experienced even with her destined mate bond to Darian. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed with a text notification. She glanced at it, expecting a message from Elena or one of her study group partners, and felt her blood turn to ice water. The message was from an unknown number, but the attached image made her identity clear. It was a photograph of her and Phoenix in his office 2 weeks ago, captured through the window with supernatural clarity. They were kissing, her hands fisted in his shirt, his fingers tangled in her hair. The angle made it impossible to deny what was happening. Below the image was a simple message. "How badly do you want to keep your scholarship? We should talk. S. Aria?" Phoenix's voice seemed to come from very far away. "What's wrong? You've gone completely pale." With numb fingers, she showed him the phone screen. She watched his face go through several expressions in rapid succession: shock, anger, and finally a deadly calm that was somehow more frightening than rage. "When was this taken?" he asked, his voice deceptively quiet. 2 weeks ago. In your office after we." She swallowed hard. Someone was watching us. Someone with a very good camera and no scruples about blackmail. Phoenix was already moving, crossing to his office windows and examining them with professional thoroughness. "The privacy wards should have prevented any surveillance," he muttered, running his hands along the window frames. "But these have been tampered with. Recently, someone with considerable magical skill has created viewing portals in my protection." "Serafina," Aria said with sick certainty. She's been looking for ammunition against me since the day I arrived on campus. This is exactly the kind of thing she'd do. Blackmail is a serious crime in the supernatural community, Phoenix said, but his expression was grim. Unfortunately, it's also effective. What does she want? Aria's phone buzzed again with another message from the same unknown number. Coffee shop on 5th Street. 1 hour. Come alone, or these photos go to the dean, the pack council, and every supernatural news outlet in the country. She wants to meet, Aria said, showing him the second message. Phoenix, if these photos become public. My career is over, he finished quietly. Yours too, most likely. The university has a zero-tolerance policy for faculty-student relationships. Even if they couldn't prove anything beyond a single kiss, the scandal would follow us both forever. Aria felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She'd cried enough over the cruelty of others, first Darian's betrayal, now Seraphina's vindictive manipulation. At some point, tears had to give way to action. I'll meet with her, she said, gathering her bag with movements that felt disconnected from her body. Find out what she wants. Try to negotiate. Absolutely not. Phoenix's voice carried the authority of an alpha, making her wolf sit up and take notice. You're not facing her alone. This is my problem too. And if someone sees us together, is this meeting another trap? She shook her head. I won't risk making this worse for you than it already is. For a moment, he looked like he wanted to argue. Then his shoulders sagged slightly, and she saw the weight of responsibility he carried, not just for his own future, but for hers as well. Be careful, he said finally. Seraphina Darkmoor Wolfsbane is more dangerous than she appears. She's been raised in a world where people are chess pieces to be moved around the board for political advantage. Don't underestimate her. An hour later, Aria sat in a corner booth at Luna's Cafe, a supernatural-friendly establishment that served coffee strong enough to wake the dead and pastries that occasionally glowed with their own inner light. She'd chosen a seat with her back to the wall and clear sight lines to all exits, paranoia that seemed ridiculous until Seraphina walked through the door. The Alpha King's daughter moved through the coffee shop like a queen surveying her domain. Her golden hair was perfectly styled despite the autumn wind outside. Her designer outfit probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and she carried herself with the kind of confidence that came from never doubting her place in the world. Aria, she said with false warmth, sliding into the booth across from her. You look, well as can be expected, I suppose. Rejection and scandal do take their toll. What do you want, Seraphina? Aria asked, skipping past pleasantries to the heart of the matter. Money? Public humiliation? What's your price for those photos? Seraphina's laugh was like wind chimes made of broken glass. Oh, darling, you misunderstand. I don't want money. I want something much more valuable. She leaned forward, her golden eyes glittering with malice. I want you gone. Gone from where? The university? The city? The supernatural community entirely. All of it. Seraphina's smile was razor-sharp. You see, your very existence is an inconvenience to me. A reminder of my mate's past poor judgment, a living symbol of what happens when people reach above their station. I want you to disappear, Aria. Transfer to another school, preferably on another continent. Leave Ravenscroft, leave the city, and never darken my perfect life with your pathetic presence again. The casual cruelty of it took Aria's breath away. This wasn't just about protecting pack politics or maintaining social order. This was personal vindictiveness dressed up as royal prerogative. And if I refuse? Seraphina pulled out her phone and scrolled through what appeared to be an entire gallery of surveillance photos. Aria and Phoenix in the hallway after their first encounter. Phoenix walked her to her apartment building, the two of them having intense conversations that could easily be misinterpreted as romantic liaisons. Then these go public, Seraphina said with cheerful malice. The dean gets copies, along with a detailed report about Professor Blackthorne's inappropriate relationship with his vulnerable student. The Pack Council receives evidence that you're a manipulative little gold digger who seduces authority figures for academic advantage. And the supernatural news networks get a delicious scandal about corruption in our most prestigious educational institutions. You can't prove anything beyond that one kiss, Aria said, but she could hear the weakness in her own voice. I don't have to prove anything, sweetie. I just have to create enough doubt, enough scandal, enough whispers to destroy both your reputations permanently. Professor Blackthorne will never teach again, and you'll be blacklisted from every supernatural institution in North America. Seraphina's smile widened. Of course, none of that has to happen if you simply disappear. Aria stared across the table at this woman who had already taken her mate, her place in pack society, and her dreams of the future she'd planned. Now Seraphina wanted to take away her education, her career prospects, and the one person who'd shown her genuine kindness since her world had collapsed. You really hate me that much? She asked quietly. Hate you? Seraphina looked genuinely surprised. Oh, darling, I don't hate you. Hatred requires caring enough to feel passion about someone. I simply want you erased. You're an inconvenience, a loose thread that threatens to unravel my perfectly ordered life. Removing inconveniences is just good policy. The casual way she said it, as if Aria's entire existence was nothing more than a minor scheduling conflict to be resolved, was somehow worse than outright hatred would have been. I need time to think, Aria said, though every cell in her body was screaming at her to fight back, to find some way to turn the tables on this golden-haired demon who treated people's lives like game pieces. Of course, Seraphina said graciously, rising from the booth with fluid elegance. You have 48 hours to make arrangements. After that. She shrugged delicately. Well, let's just say that scandal moves very quickly in our community, especially when it involves such photogenic subjects. As she walked away, her heels clicking against the cafe's hardwood floors like a countdown timer, Aria felt the walls of her carefully rebuilt life closing in around her. She'd survived Darian's betrayal, the rogue attack, the humiliation of starting over. But this felt different, more personal, more targeted. Seraphina wasn't just trying to destroy her. She was trying to erase her entirely, to make it as if Aria Nightingale had never existed at all. And the worst part was, she might actually succeed. Chapter 7. The Gathering Storm. Aria sat in her apartment that night, staring at her laptop screen without really seeing the code scrolling past. Her mind kept replaying the meeting with Seraphina, each cruel word echoing in her memory, like poison in her bloodstream. 48 hours to disappear from her own life, to abandon everything she'd worked for, or watch Phoenix's career burn alongside her own academic future. Her phone had been buzzing intermittently with messages from Phoenix, carefully worded texts asking about her research consultation and whether she needed any additional academic support. Even in crisis, he was protecting them both by maintaining the fiction of their professional relationship. She hadn't answered any of them. What was she supposed to say? That his instinct to protect her had been right, that facing Seraphina alone had been a mistake? That the golden-haired she-devil wasn't content with just destroying Aria's life. She wanted to salt the earth, so nothing could ever grow there again? Her laptop chimed with an encrypted message notification. She almost ignored it, assuming it was another assignment reminder or study group coordination, but the sender's address made her heart skip. Phoenix Rising at Secure, Ravens, EDU. Are you alright? Your silence is concerning me. If you need to talk, my apartment is warmer than my office. 47, Shadowbrook Lane, Unit 3B. I'll be awake. P. Aria stared at the message for several minutes, torn between the desperate desire to see him and the knowledge that every moment they spent together increased the danger to them both. But the careful way he'd phrased everything, the professional concern, the security considerations, the plausible deniability, told her that he understood the stakes as clearly as she did. 20 minutes later, she stood outside his apartment building, a converted Victorian mansion in one of the city's historic districts. The building practically hummed with protective magic, layer upon layer of wards designed to keep out unwanted visitors, supernatural surveillance, and even casual curiosity from neighbors. Unit 3B was on the top floor, accessed by a narrow staircase that creaked with age but felt solid beneath her feet. She knocked softly, a barely audible sound that nevertheless brought immediate footsteps to the door. Phoenix opened it wearing jeans and a dark sweater that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders, his usually perfect hair slightly mussed as if he'd been running his hands through it. His silver eyes searched her face with an intensity that made her feel simultaneously seen and vulnerable. "Come in," he said quietly, stepping aside to let her enter. "These walls have protections that would make government-safe rooms jealous. We can speak freely here." His apartment was a study in controlled elegance, much like his office but more personal. Books covered every available surface, ranging from ancient grimoires to modern technical manuals. The furniture was expensive but comfortable, clearly chosen for function over flash. What caught her attention, though, were the photographs, not family portraits or social gatherings, but landscapes that seemed to capture moments of wild beauty. Moonlight on snow-covered mountains, storm clouds gathering over endless forests, dawn breaking over a lake so still it looked like polished obsidian. "You took these?" she asked, pausing before a particularly striking image of lightning illuminating a castle perched on a cliff. "Photography is a hobby," he said, but there was something in his voice that suggested those images held deeper meaning. "It helps me remember places I can't visit anymore." Before she could ask what he meant, he continued, "Tell me about your meeting with Serafina. Don't spare my feelings. I need to know exactly what we're dealing with." So she told him everything. Serafina's casual cruelty, the collection of surveillance photos, the ultimatum that would force her to disappear entirely or watch both their careers burn in the flames of manufactured scandal. Phoenix listened without interruption, his expression growing darker with each detail. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment, staring out the window at the city lights below. "She's more dangerous than I thought," he said finally. "This isn't just about removing competition or protecting her social status. This is systematic destruction designed to erase you as a person." "I know." Aria sank into one of his leather chairs, suddenly exhausted by the weight of carrying this burden alone. "The question is, what do we do about it? Fighting back would mean exposing our relationship, which gives her exactly what she wants. But giving in means she wins everything." "There's a third option," Phoenix said slowly, as if the words were difficult to voice. "I could resign. Take full responsibility for inappropriate conduct, claiming I manipulated you into a compromising situation. Your reputation stays intact, your education continues, and I disappear from both your lives."
"No."
The word came out sharper than she'd intended, carrying the authority of her wolf's immediate rejection of that plan. "Absolutely not. I won't let you sacrifice your career for my problems." "Your problems?" Phoenix turned from the window to face her, his silver eyes blazing with intensity. "Aria, this is happening because of what I allowed to develop between us. Because I couldn't maintain professional distance, because I let my personal feelings compromise my judgment. The responsibility is mine. The responsibility belongs to Serafina and her vindictive manipulation," Aria said firmly. "You saved my life, Phoenix. You've been nothing but supportive of my academic work. Whatever's developed between us personally, that's not something to apologize for. Isn't it?" He moved closer, his presence filling the space between them with electricity. "I'm your professor, Aria. I hold power over your grades, your recommendations, your entire academic future. Even if we both wanted this, even if every touch and kiss has been genuine, the inequality makes it wrong. Then maybe you should stop being my professor." The words hung in the air between them, radical and dangerous, and full of implications neither of them had been willing to voice until now. "What are you suggesting?" Phoenix asked quietly. "I don't know," she admitted. "Transfer to another instructor's section? Take independent study? Audit the course instead of taking it for credit? There has to be some way to eliminate the power dynamic without destroying everything we've both worked for." Phoenix was quiet for a long moment, considering possibilities. "Dr. Ravencroft teaches an equivalent section," he said slowly. "She's brilliant, and she's been looking for students to mentor in advanced research. If you transferred to her class, if we maintained strictly professional contact during the remainder of the semester? It could work, Aria said, hope blooming in her chest for the first time since receiving Seraphina's threatening text. But what about the photos? She's still got ammunition to destroy us both if she chooses to use it. One crisis at a time, Phoenix said. First, we remove her primary leverage by ensuring there's nothing improper about our current relationship. Then we figure out how to deal with the blackmail. It was a reasonable plan, logical and careful, and designed to protect them both. So, why did it feel like they were planning to tear out their own hearts? There's something else you need to know, Phoenix said, his voice taking on a weight that made her wolf alert with concern. About who I really am, why someone like Seraphina might see me as a particular threat to her family's power structure. Aria waited, sensing that whatever he was about to reveal would change everything between them. My full name is Phoenix Blackthorne, but that's not the name I was born with. I'm the illegitimate son of someone very powerful in the supernatural community, someone whose existence would be inconvenient if it became public knowledge. Phoenix, she said softly, you don't have to tell me anything you're not ready to share. I do, he said firmly, because if Seraphina discovers my true identity, the blackmail photos will be the least of our problems. She won't just want to destroy us professionally, she'll want to eliminate us permanently. Before he could continue, both their phones buzzed simultaneously with emergency alerts. Aria grabbed hers, her blood chilling as she read the message from Ravenscroft's emergency notification system. Campus alert. Supernatural incident reported in Thornfield building. All students and faculty were advised to shelter in place until further notice. Do not approach the affected area. Phoenix was already moving, grabbing a jacket and keys from a table by the door. That's my building, he said grimly. My office, my research, everything. Phoenix, the alert says to shelter in place. Someone has just escalated this conflict beyond simple blackmail, he said, his voice carrying an authority that made her wolf snap to attention. This isn't a coincidence, Aria. Seraphina isn't content to wait 48 hours for your decision. As they rushed toward the door, neither of them noticed the shadow that detached itself from the building across the street, or the figure that followed them into the night with eyes that glowed red in the darkness. The game was changing, and the stakes were about to become deadlier than either of them had imagined. Chapter 8. Flames and Revelations. The Thornfield building looked like something from a nightmare when they arrived. What should have been a sleek monument to technological advancement now stood wreathed in flames that burned with unnatural colors, blues and purples, and silver-white tongues of fire that spoke of magical origins rather than simple combustion. Emergency vehicles surrounded the building, their flashing lights casting eerie shadows on the faces of students and faculty who had gathered despite the shelter-in-place orders. Supernatural emergency responders moved with practiced efficiency, their specialized equipment designed to handle mystical disasters that regular firefighters couldn't even comprehend. Professor Blackthorne, a young woman in Ravenscroft security gear, jogged toward them, her face streaked with soot and concern. Thank the moon goddess you're here. The fire started in your office, or what's left of it. The entire third floor is compromised. Phoenix's face went ashen. Was anyone hurt? No casualties, but the security officer hesitated. Sir, this wasn't an accident. Someone broke through your ward protections and planted what looks like a combination of incendiary devices and curse bombs. This was deliberate magical sabotage. Aria felt her stomach drop. She'd been naive to think Seraphina would wait the full 48 hours, naive to believe that blackmail would be the extent of her vindictive campaign. The Alpha King's daughter wasn't just playing games. She was willing to commit serious crimes to eliminate her perceived threats. My research, Phoenix said quietly, staring up at the flames consuming what had been his life's work. 20 years of research notes, irreplaceable texts, experimental data. Professor? The security officer looked confused by his apparent calm in the face of such devastating loss. The investigators will want to speak with you about who might have had access to your office. Any recent security concerns? Of course, Phoenix said, but his silver eyes were scanning the crowd with predatory intensity. Officer, has anyone claimed responsibility for this attack? Any witnesses who saw suspicious activity around the building tonight? Before the officer could answer, Aria's phone buzzed with a new message. The same unknown number as before, the same sender who had shattered her world with blackmail photos just hours earlier. Such a shame about the professor's office. Magical fires are so unpredictable. They can spread to other buildings, other lives, other careers. Tick-tock, little wolf. Your time is running out. She did this. Aria breathed, showing Phoenix the message. Serafina burned down your office because we didn't capitulate fast enough to her demands. Phoenix's expression went deadly still, his wolf rising so close to the surface that his eyes began to glow with that distinctive silver light. Several nearby supernatural beings stepped back instinctively, their own animals recognizing the presence of an apex predator barely held in check. Professor Blackthorne? The security officer's voice held a note of concern. Sir, we need you to come with us for questioning. This is standard procedure for any faculty member whose office has been targeted. Of course, Phoenix said again, but his attention was focused on something across the emergency scene. Following his gaze, Aria saw a familiar figure standing at the edge of the crowd, golden hair perfectly styled despite the late hour, designer clothes that managed to look both appropriate for a crisis scene and utterly impractical for actual emergency response. Serafina Darkmoor Wolfsbane stood watching the flames with what could charitably be called concern, but Aria could see the satisfaction glittering in her golden eyes. She was enjoying this, reveling in the destruction she'd caused and the chaos that would follow. Go, Aria said quietly to Phoenix. Answer their questions, cooperate with the investigation. Don't give them any reason to suspect you no more than you should. What about you? I'm going to have another conversation with our arsonist, Aria said, her wolf prowling beneath her skin with barely contained rage. Someone needs to make it clear that this escalation comes with consequences. Phoenix grabbed her wrist, his grip gentle but insistent. Aria, no. She's dangerous, and she's clearly willing to commit serious crimes to get what she wants. Don't put yourself at risk. I'm already at risk, she pointed out. We both are. The question is whether we let her destroy everything we care about, or whether we find a way to fight back. For a moment, Phoenix looked like he wanted to argue further. Then his shoulders sagged slightly, and she saw the weight of impossible choices settling on him like a physical burden. Be careful, he said finally. Whatever else happens, promise me you'll be careful. I promise, she lied, because they both knew that being careful had stopped being an option the moment Serafina decided to escalate from blackmail to arson. Aria made her way through the crowd toward where Serafina stood, noting how the other spectators seemed to unconsciously give the Alpha King's daughter a wide berth. Power recognized power in the supernatural world, even when it was wrapped in designer clothing and false concern. Serafina, she said quietly, approaching from the side to avoid drawing attention from nearby emergency responders. Enjoying the show? The golden-haired she-wolf turned with a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. Aria, how terrible that you're here to witness such a tragic accident. Though I suppose Professor Blackthorne will need all the emotional support he can get, losing so much of his precious research. Accident, Aria repeated flatly. Is that what we're calling magical arson now? Such a vivid imagination, Serafina said with false sympathy. I suppose trauma can make people paranoid, can it? First you convinced yourself that my mate actually cared about you. Now you're seeing conspiracy theories in random building fires. The casual cruelty of the reference to Darian made Aria's hands clench into fists, but she forced herself to maintain control. Starting a physical confrontation here, surrounded by emergency responders and potential witnesses, would only give Serafina more ammunition. What do you want? She asked instead. The ultimatum, the photos, the blackmail, now arson and destruction of property. What's your endgame here, Serafina? What's worth committing felony crimes to achieve? Oh, darling, Serafina's laugh was like silver bells dipped in acid. You still don't understand, do you? This isn't about what I want. This is about what I am, what I represent, what my family stands for in the supernatural community. She stepped closer, lowering her voice so only Aria could hear. I am the daughter of the Alpha King, mated to the heir of one of the most powerful packs on the continent. My bloodline stretches back to the first werewolves who walked this earth. I am royalty, Aria. Literal supernatural royalty. And I'm supposed to be impressed by an accident of birth? You're supposed to understand your place, Seraphina hissed, her perfect facade cracking to reveal the venom beneath. I don't destroy people like you because I hate you. I destroy them because their very existence is an insult to the natural order. You're nobody, Aria. A packless reject with delusions of adequacy who thinks she can compete with her betters. Is that what this is about? Aria felt pieces clicking together in her mind, a pattern of behavior that went beyond simple vindictiveness. You're not just threatened by me specifically, you're threatened by the idea that someone like me could succeed at all. Seraphina's golden eyes flashed with something that might have been respect for Aria's insight, or might have been fury at being so accurately read. The supernatural world has an order, she said coldly. Alphas rule, lesser wolves follow, and rejects disappear quietly into obscurity where they belong. When someone like you refuses to accept that order, when you keep climbing and achieving and making something of yourself despite being cast out. She shrugged elegantly. Well, examples must be made. Examples. Professor Blackthorne's career burned along with his research. Your academic future is destroyed by scandal. Both of you reduced to cautionary tales about what happens when people forget their proper place in the hierarchy. Seraphina's smile returned, sharp and satisfied. The fires tonight were just the opening act, darling. Unless you disappear voluntarily, I'll keep escalating until there's nothing left of either of you but ash and memories. Before Aria could respond, a commotion near the emergency vehicles drew their attention. Phoenix was being escorted away from the scene by what looked like more than just campus security, men and women in dark suits who moved with the kind of professional competence that suggested federal supernatural authorities. Oh my, Seraphina said with false concern, that doesn't look good for the professor. I do hope they don't discover anything compromising during their investigation. Ice water replaced the blood in Aria's veins. What did you do? Nothing at all, Seraphina said innocently. Though I did happen to mention to the investigators that Professor Blackthorne had been acting strangely lately. Secretive meetings, unexplained absences, unusual interest in certain students' personal lives. The kind of behavior that might suggest someone with something to hide. Ice water replaced the blood in Aria's veins. What did you do? Nothing at all, Seraphina said innocently. Though I did happen to mention to the investigators that Professor Blackthorne had been acting strangely lately. Secretive meetings, unexplained absences, unusual interest in certain students' personal lives. The kind of behavior that might suggest someone with something to hide. The implications hit Aria like a physical blow. Seraphina hadn't just burned Phoenix's office. She'd planted evidence or testimony designed to make him look guilty of the crime himself. A desperate professor destroying evidence of his own misconduct, perhaps, or someone with secrets dark enough to justify extreme measures. You're going to frame him, Aria breathed, for his own office fire. I'm not going to do anything, Seraphina corrected with deadly sweetness. The investigators will follow the evidence wherever it leads. If that evidence happens to support a narrative about a troubled professor who let his personal life compromise his professional judgment. She shrugged again. Well, truth has a way of coming to light, doesn't it? As Seraphina walked away, her heels clicking against the pavement like a countdown timer, Aria stood frozen in the chaos of the emergency scene. Phoenix was gone, taken for questioning that would likely last hours or days. His life's work was literal ashes drifting on the night wind. And somewhere in those ashes, Seraphina had planted the seeds of a conspiracy that could destroy them both. The game had changed again, and this time the stakes weren't just their careers or reputations. This time, it was their freedom, their futures, and quite possibly their lives. Chapter 9. The Hunt Begins. The next 72 hours passed in a blur of nightmare scenarios and desperate phone calls. Phoenix had been taken to a federal supernatural detention facility for questioning, his whereabouts classified and his communication privileges suspended pending the investigation. The official story was that he was being held as a material witness, but Aria knew the truth. Serafina's carefully planted evidence was doing its work, painting him as either the perpetrator or an accomplice in the destruction of his own office. Aria barely slept, barely ate, spending her time researching supernatural legal procedures and calling every contact she could think of who might have influence with federal authorities. Elena and Alpha Ironwood offered what help they could, but their pack's influence only extended so far into the labyrinthine bureaucracy of supernatural law enforcement. The charges haven't been filed yet, Elena reported after her latest round of phone calls, but sources suggest they're building a case for destruction of federal property. Apparently, some of Professor Blackthorne's research was funded by government grants, which makes the arson a federal crime. That's insane, Aria said, pacing Elena's kitchen like a caged wolf. His entire life's work was in that office. Why would he destroy his own research? The theory they're pursuing, Alpha Ironwood said grimly, is that he was covering up evidence of academic misconduct. Inappropriate relationships with students, falsified research data, misuse of grant funds, the kind of scandals that would destroy a career and land someone in federal prison. The words hit Aria like physical blows. Every interaction she'd had with Phoenix was being weaponized against him, twisted into evidence of corruption and abuse of power. Their kiss in his office, the private conversations, even his genuine efforts to mentor her academically. All of it was being reframed as predatory behavior that he'd been desperate enough to commit arson to conceal. "This is all my fault," she whispered, sinking into one of Elena's kitchen chairs. "If I hadn't gone to his office that night, if I hadn't let things develop between us." "This is Serafina Darkmoor-Wolfsbane's fault," Elena corrected firmly. She orchestrated this entire situation, from the surveillance to the blackmail to the arson itself. "You and Professor Blackthorne are victims here, not perpetrators." "Try telling that to the federal prosecutors," Aria said bitterly. "They have photos of us together, witness testimony about unusual behavior, and a convenient narrative that explains everything. Meanwhile, Serafina gets to play the concerned citizen who just happened to notice suspicious activity." Her phone rang, displaying yet another unknown number. Over the past 3 days, she'd been fielding calls from reporters, supernatural news outlets, and what sounded like federal agents fishing for information. This time, however, the voice on the other end made her blood freeze. "Miss Nightingale? This is Agent Sarah Chun with the Federal Bureau of Supernatural Affairs. We need to speak with you regarding the Thornfield building incident and your relationship with Professor Phoenix Blackthorne." "I've already spoken with investigators," Aria said carefully, aware that Elena and Alpha Ironwood were listening intently. "I told them everything I know about the fire, which is nothing." "This isn't about the fire specifically," Agent Chin said, her tone professional but not unkind. "We're conducting a broader investigation into Professor Blackthorne's activities over the past several months. Your name has come up repeatedly in our interviews, and we'd appreciate the opportunity to hear your perspective on certain allegations." Allegations. The word carried implications that made Aria's wolf pace restlessly beneath her skin. "What kind of allegations?" "The kind better discussed in person, Miss Nightingale. Can you come to our offices this afternoon? Say, 2 o'clock? It wasn't really a question, and they both knew it. Refusing to cooperate with a federal investigation would only make her look guilty of something, even if she had no idea what crimes she was supposedly connected to. "I'll be there," she said finally. "Should I bring a lawyer?" "That's entirely up to you, though I should mention that you're not currently a suspect in any crime. We simply need to verify some information and get your statement on record." After hanging up, Aria stared at her phone in numb disbelief. 3 days ago, her biggest worry had been managing her feelings for her professor while maintaining academic integrity. Now she was apparently a person of interest in a federal investigation, her life dissected by agents looking for evidence of crimes she couldn't even comprehend. "I'm calling Marcus Shadowtail," Alpha Ironwood said, already reaching for his phone. "He's the best supernatural defense attorney in the region, and he owes me a favor." "James, I can't afford. You can't afford not to have representation, Elena interrupted. Aria, dear, this situation is spiraling beyond anything you can handle alone. Let us help you. 2 hours later, Aria sat in the sterile conference room of the Federal Bureau of Supernatural Affairs, flanked by Marcus Shadowtail, a silver-haired wolf whose reputation for courtroom victories was legendary in supernatural legal circles. Across from them sat Agent Chen and her partner, Agent Rodriguez, both of whom projected the kind of professional competence that made it clear this was not their first federal investigation. Miss Nightingale, Agent Chen began, opening a thick file folder. We appreciate you coming in voluntarily. As I mentioned on the phone, this is about Professor Blackthorne and certain allegations that have come to our attention. What kind of allegations? Marcus asked before Aria could speak. My client has a right to know what she's being questioned about. Agent Rodriguez slid a photograph across the table. It was one of Serafina's surveillance images, Aria and Phoenix in his office, moments before their forbidden kiss. But someone had enhanced it, cropped it, presented it in a way that made their interaction look far more sinister than it had been. We have evidence suggesting that Professor Blackthorne engaged in inappropriate relationships with multiple students over the course of his tenure at Ravenscroft, Agent Chen said. Relationships that may have involved quid pro quo arrangements, grades for favors, recommendations for sexual services, that sort of thing. That's completely false, Aria said, her voice stronger than she felt. Professor Blackthorne never behaved inappropriately with me or anyone else. His conduct was always professional. Professional enough that you met with him privately in his office after hours? Agent Rodriguez asked, tapping the photograph. Professional enough that you went to his private apartment for what witnesses describe as intimate consultations. Aria's heart hammered against her ribs. Someone had been watching her visit to Phoenix's apartment the night of the fire, documenting their movements and interactions. Professor Blackthorne was helping me with advanced research projects, she said carefully. Any meetings were academic in nature. Academic meetings that required the level of physical intimacy shown in these photographs. Agent Chen produced more images, different angles of the same kiss, each one presented to make their connection look predatory rather than mutual. Marcus leaned forward slightly. Agents, unless you're prepared to charge my client with something specific, I think we're done here. You're fishing for information about what appears to be a consensual adult relationship, which is hardly a federal crime. Consensual adult relationships between professors and students violate university policy, Agent Rodriguez pointed out. When those relationships are used to influence academic outcomes, they become fraud. When they involve federal research grants or educational funding, they become federal fraud. The implication was clear. They were building a case that painted Phoenix as a sexual predator who traded academic advancement for intimate access to vulnerable students. And they wanted Aria to either confirm that narrative or become a co-conspirator in covering it up. I want to help Professor Blackthorne, Aria said finally. He's a good man who doesn't deserve what's happening to him. But I won't lie under oath, and I won't pretend that our relationship was something it wasn't. Agent Chen's expression softened slightly. Miss Nightingale, we understand that this is difficult. Victims of academic sexual misconduct often feel conflicted about their experiences, especially when they've developed feelings for their abuser. He didn't abuse me, Aria said firmly. Whatever happened between us, it was mutual and consensual and had nothing to do with my grades or academic standing. Then why the secrecy? Why the private meetings, the encrypted communications, the careful avoidance of public interaction? Because we were falling in love, Aria thought, but couldn't say. Because what we felt for each other was real and precious and worth protecting from exactly this kind of institutional scrutiny. Because we knew it looked inappropriate, she said instead. We were trying to maintain professional boundaries while working together on legitimate research projects. The interview continued for another hour, with the agents probing every aspect of her relationship with Phoenix, while Marcus deflected the more invasive questions. By the time they were finished, Aria felt emotionally wrung out, as if every private moment she'd shared with Phoenix had been dissected and analyzed for evidence of criminal behavior. One more thing, Miss Nightingale, Agent Chen said as they prepared to leave. You should know that Professor Blackthorne is claiming he barely knows you. Says your interactions were minimal and purely professional, that any evidence to the contrary has been fabricated or taken out of context. The words hit Aria like a physical blow. Phoenix was protecting her the only way he knew how, by denying their connection entirely, painting himself as the sole responsible party while minimizing her involvement in whatever charges they were building against him. It was noble and self-sacrificing and absolutely heartbreaking. As they walked out of the federal building into the late afternoon sunlight, Marcus Shadowtail shook his head grimly. "They're going to arrest him," he said without preamble. "Probably within the next 48 hours. The evidence is circumstantial, but they've got enough to make charges stick, especially if they can convince a jury that he's part of a larger pattern of academic corruption." "What can we do?" "Find the real arsonist," Marcus said simply. "Prove that someone else burned down that office and framed Professor Blackthorne for the crime. Without that, he's looking at federal charges that could put him away for decades." As they walked toward Marcus's car, Aria made a decision that would have terrified her just a week earlier. She was done being a victim of other people's manipulations, done letting Seraphina Darkmoor Wolfsbane destroy everything good in her life. It was time to go hunting. And this time, she wouldn't be hunting alone. Chapter 10. Allies in the Shadows. The abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the supernatural district looked like the kind of place where bad decisions went to die. Broken windows stared down at the empty street like hollow eyes, and graffiti in multiple languages, some of them definitely not human, covered the brick walls in layers of territorial marking and mystical warnings. Aria checked her phone for the third time, confirming both the address and the time. Midnight, as requested by the anonymous contact who had reached out to her through encrypted channels just hours after her federal interrogation. The message had been brief but intriguing. "I have information about the Thornfield fire. Information that could save Professor Blackthorne. Come alone." Every survival instinct she possessed was screaming at her not to enter that warehouse. Meeting unknown contacts in abandoned buildings was the kind of mistake that got people killed in both supernatural politics and federal investigations. But Phoenix was sitting in a detention cell, facing charges that could destroy his life, while Seraphina played innocent victim and plotted her next move. Sometimes desperate times called for spectacularly poor judgment. The warehouse door stood slightly ajar, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. Aria pushed it open slowly, her enhanced senses immediately cataloging the scents within: old metal, dust, motor oil, and underneath it all, the distinctive musk that marked someone of supernatural heritage. "Miss Nightingale." The voice came from the shadows near the back of the warehouse, cultured and familiar in a way that made her wolf prick up with interest. "Thank you for coming." A figure stepped into the dim light filtering through the broken windows, and Aria's breath caught in recognition. Darien Wolfsbane looked exactly as she remembered, tall, powerfully built, with the kind of natural authority that marked him as future alpha material. But there was something different about his golden eyes, something that spoke of regret and carefully controlled desperation.
"Darien."
She kept her voice neutral, though her wolf was reacting to his presence with a complex mix of old pain and wary interest. "This is unexpected." "I imagine it is." He moved closer, his hands visible and empty in what she recognized as a gesture of non-aggression. "I know you have every reason not to trust me, Aria. What I did to you, the way I handled the mate bond severance, there are no excuses for it." "No, there aren't." She crossed her arms, maintaining physical distance even as she studied his face for signs of deception. "So, why are we here, Darien? What information could you possibly have about Professor Blackthorne's situation?" "Information that could save him," Darien said simply. "And information that could destroy my mate if it comes to light through official channels." That got her attention. Despite everything Seraphina had put her through, Aria had never imagined that Darien might turn against his own mate to help her. "I'm listening." Darien pulled out a tablet, swiping to a collection of files that looked like they'd been copied from secured servers. "Seraphina didn't just burn down Professor Blackthorne's office, Aria. She's been planning this campaign against you for months, documenting your movements, bribing campus security for access to surveillance footage, even hiring private investigators to dig into your background. He showed her the first file, a detailed dossier on her life that included everything from her academic records to her favorite coffee shop, her exercise routine to her friendship with Elena and Alpha Ironwood. The level of invasive surveillance was staggering. "She's been watching you since before you even enrolled at Ravenscroft," Darian continued. "The moment she learned you'd been accepted, she started planning ways to destroy your academic career. The professor situation just gave her more ammunition." "Why are you showing me this?" Aria asked, though she was already scrolling through files that painted a picture of systematic stalking and harassment. "Why betray your mate to help me?" Darian was quiet for a long moment, staring out through one of the broken windows at the city lights beyond. "Because the woman I'm mated to now isn't the person I thought I was choosing," he said finally. "The bond-severing potion didn't just dissolve my connection to you, Aria. It changed me, changed how I think and feel about everything, including what I'm willing to accept in the name of pack politics." He turned back to face her, and she saw something in his eyes that looked like the man she'd once loved, the one who'd existed before magical manipulation had twisted his priorities. "Seraphina is sick," he said bluntly. "Not physically, but psychologically. She's obsessed with maintaining what she calls the natural order of supernatural society. Anyone who challenges that order, anyone who achieves success despite being born into lower stations, she sees them as threats that need to be eliminated." "I gathered that from our conversations," Aria said dryly. "The question is, what does any of this have to do with Phoenix's arrest?" "Everything." Darian swiped to another file, this one containing what looked like financial records and communication logs. The arson wasn't just about destroying evidence of your relationship with the professor. It was about eliminating research that threatened her father's business interests. Aria blinked in confusion. "What kind of research?" "Professor Blackthorne's work on mystical cybersecurity wasn't just academic," Darian explained. "He was developing protocols that would make it impossible for supernatural authorities to monitor or control digital communications within werewolf communities. Essentially, he was creating tools that could be used to organize resistance against corrupt alpha leadership." The implications hit Aria like a physical blow. Phoenix hadn't just been teaching advanced security concepts, he'd been developing weapons that could be used against the very power structure that Seraphina's family controlled. The Alpha King couldn't move against him directly, without raising questions, Darian continued. But if Professor Blackthorne could be discredited, arrested for academic misconduct, his research seized as evidence, well, that would solve multiple problems at once. "So they used me," Aria said, the pieces clicking together in her mind. "Seraphina encouraged whatever was developing between Phoenix and me, documented it, then used it as the foundation for a framed job that would destroy both our credibility and eliminate a potential threat to Alpha Authority in the process," Darian confirmed. "Two birds, one very elaborate stone." Aria stared at the files on the tablet, feeling sick as she realized how thoroughly she and Phoenix had been manipulated. Every moment of their relationship, every stolen kiss and whispered confession had been observed and catalogued for use as weapons against them. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked again. "If this information could destroy Seraphina, it could destabilize your own position as her mate. You'd be giving up everything you chose when you severed our bond." Darian's smile was bitter, tinged with the kind of regret that came from making irreversible mistakes. "What I chose, Aria, was an illusion. The woman I thought I was mating with doesn't exist. She's a carefully constructed facade designed to hide someone capable of this level of systematic cruelty." He gestured at the tablet, at the evidence of months of planning and surveillance and deliberate destruction. "I can't undo what I did to us," he said quietly. "The bond severance was permanent, and even if it wasn't, too much has happened for us to go back to what we were. But I can try to prevent her from destroying anyone else the way she's destroyed you and Professor Blackthorne." Aria studied his face, looking for signs of deception or hidden agenda. What she saw instead was genuine remorse and a kind of weary determination that suggested he'd already counted the cost of betraying his mate and decided it was worth paying. "What do you want in return?" she asked, because in the supernatural world, information this valuable always came with a price. "Help me stop her," Darian said simply. Not just this case, not just Professor Blackthorne's arrest, but all of it. The surveillance, the systematic harassment, the way she treats people like chess pieces to be moved around for her family's political advantage. You want me to help you bring down your own mate? I want you to help me stop a monster who happens to be wearing my mate's face, he corrected. Because if we don't stop her now, Professor Blackthorne won't be the last person she destroys. She'll keep escalating, keep finding new targets, until someone with enough power to resist her decides that elimination is simpler than containment. The warehouse fell quiet except for the distant sound of traffic and the soft whisper of wind through broken windows. Aria weighed her options, knowing that accepting Darian's offer would make her player in supernatural politics rather than just a victim of them. What's your plan? She asked finally. Darian's smile was sharp with anticipation. We give the federal investigators what they really want, evidence of a conspiracy that goes all the way to the Alpha King himself. But first, we need to get Professor Blackthorne out of custody before Serafina decides that framing him isn't enough and moves on to more permanent solutions. As they began planning their next moves, neither of them noticed the small surveillance drone hovering outside one of the broken windows, its camera recording everything with supernatural clarity. Serafina Darkmoor Wolfsbane smiled as she watched the feed on her phone. Her rejected mate and her former rival, working together against her. How perfectly predictable, and how wonderfully convenient. Now she had all the justification she needed for what came next. Chapter 11. The Trap Within the Trap. The plan they hatched in that abandoned warehouse was elegant in its simplicity. Use Darian's access to Serafina's private files to expose her surveillance operation while simultaneously providing the federal investigators with evidence that Phoenix had been framed. Marcus Shadowtail would present the documentation through proper legal channels, clearing Phoenix's name while implicating Serafina and her father in a conspiracy that went far beyond simple academic misconduct. It should have worked. It would have worked if they hadn't underestimated exactly how many moves ahead Serafina was planning. Aria realized their mistake when she arrived at her apartment the next evening to find federal agents waiting in her living room. Not the professional but relatively courteous investigators from the day before. These were tactical agents in full combat gear, the kind deployed when suspects were considered dangerous and likely to resist arrest. Miss Nightingale, Agent Chen said, though her tone was nothing like the measured professionalism she displayed during the interview. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit federal crimes, obstruction of justice, and accessory to domestic terrorism. Domestic terrorism? Aria's voice came out as a strangled whisper. What are you talking about? Agent Rodriguez stepped forward, reading from what looked like a prepared statement. Evidence has come to light suggesting that you and Professor Blackthorne were working with radical elements to develop tools for undermining federal authority over supernatural communities. The arson at Thornfield Building was an attempt to destroy evidence of this conspiracy when you became aware of federal surveillance. The words hit Aria like physical blows, each accusation more surreal than the last. In less than 24 hours, she'd gone from a victim of Serafina's manipulation to a terrorist suspect in a federal investigation. This is insane, she said, but the agents were already moving, professional and efficient as they secured her apartment and prepared to transport her to whatever facility held supernatural enemies of the state. I want a lawyer. I want Marcus Shadowtail. Mr. Shadowtail has been arrested as well, Agent Chen informed her with what might have been sympathy. Along with Darian Wolfsbane. It seems your conspiracy was more extensive than we initially realized. As they led her toward the waiting vehicles, Aria caught sight of a familiar figure standing across the street, partially hidden in the shadows between streetlights. Serafina Darkmoor Wolfsbane watched the arrest with undisguised satisfaction, her golden hair catching the light like a halo around her beautiful, pitiless face. Their eyes met across the distance, and Serafina raised her phone in a small salute, the same phone that had undoubtedly been used to record their meeting in the warehouse, to document Darian's betrayal, to provide federal agents with evidence of a conspiracy that existed only in her twisted imagination. The trap within the trap. Serafina had known they would eventually try to fight back, had counted on it, and had prepared for it. Every move they'd made to save Phoenix and expose her crimes had been anticipated, planned for, turned into additional evidence of their guilt. The Federal Detention Center for Supernatural Persons was a fortress of steel and concrete wrapped in layers of mystical containment wards. Aria had seen it from the outside during her research into Phoenix's arrest, but being processed through its security checkpoints as a prisoner rather than a visitor was an entirely different experience. They stripped her of everything: phone, jewelry, even the small silver pendant that had been her grandmother's. The booking process was thorough, invasive, and designed to reduce supernatural detainees to their most vulnerable state. By the time they locked her in a cell that hummed with power-suppressing magic, she felt more human than she had since her first transformation. "Miss Nightingale?" A voice from the cell across the narrow corridor made her look up. Marcus Shadowtail sat on his narrow bunk, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled, but his eyes still sharp with a legal mind. "Are you injured?" "Physically, no," she said, moving to the small window in her cell door. The corridor was empty except for the two of them, suggesting that supernatural political prisoners were kept isolated from the general population. "Marcus, what's happening? How did they turn a meeting about evidence into terrorism charges?" "Seraphina Darkmoor Wolfsbane is more dangerous than any of us realized," Marcus said grimly. "She didn't just anticipate our moves, she orchestrated them. Every piece of evidence Darian thought he was providing to help our case was actually bait in a larger trap." "What do you mean?" "The surveillance files, the financial records, even his testimony about Professor Blackthorne's research, all of it was designed to support a narrative about a radical conspiracy against supernatural government authority. She let Darian access those files knowing he would bring them to you, knowing you would try to use them to clear Professor Blackthorne's name." Aria felt sick as the implications became clear. She wanted us to expose the surveillance operation because it made us look like we were trying to cover up terrorist activities.
Exactly.
And now she has recordings of all of us discussing ways to stop her, to bring down her family's power structure, to organize resistance against corrupt alpha leadership. Taken out of context, those conversations sound like evidence of seditious conspiracy. Before Aria could respond, footsteps echoed down the corridor. A guard appeared, unlocking her cell with movements that were both professional and wary. "Nightingale," he said, not meeting her eyes. "You have a visitor." The visiting room was a sterile space divided by reinforced glass, with communication handled through phones that were undoubtedly monitored and recorded. Aria expected to see Elena or Alpha Ironwood, someone from the Moonrise Pack who had come to offer support or legal assistance. Instead, she found herself facing Phoenix Blackthorne. He looked terrible, hollow-eyed and pale, wearing the same orange detention uniform she'd been given. But when their eyes met through the glass barrier, she saw the same silver fire that had drawn her to him from the beginning.
Aria.
His voice through the phone was hoarse, strained with emotion and exhaustion. "Are you hurt? When I heard they'd arrested you—" "I'm fine," she lied, because neither of them needed additional worry right now. "Phoenix, I'm so sorry. This is all my fault. If I hadn't gotten involved with Darian, if I hadn't tried to fight back against Seraphina—" "Stop." His voice carried the authority that had made him such an effective professor, cutting through her self-recrimination. "This isn't your fault, and it isn't mine. This is the result of a systematic campaign by someone who sees other people as obstacles to be removed rather than individuals with inherent worth." "The research," Aria said, remembering what Darian had told her about Phoenix's work on mystical cybersecurity. "Was it true? Were you really developing tools that could be used against supernatural authorities?" Phoenix was quiet for a moment, and she could see him weighing how much truth he could share over monitored communication channels. "I was developing privacy protections," he said finally. "Ways for supernatural communities to communicate and organize without surveillance by authorities who might not have their best interests at heart. The same kind of tools that helped human civil rights movements organize in the face of government opposition. And now they're calling it domestic terrorism. Because it threatens the existing power structure," Phoenix said. "Because it would make it harder for people like Seraphina's father to control and manipulate supernatural communities for political gain." A guard appeared behind Phoenix, signaling that their visiting time was almost over. But before they were separated, he leaned closer to the glass, his silver eyes intense with something that looked like desperate hope. Aria, there's something I need to tell you. About who I really am, about why Serafina is so determined to destroy both of us. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. My real father. The line went dead. The guard was already pulling Phoenix away from the phone, ending their conversation before he could reveal whatever secret he'd been carrying. Aria pressed her hand against the glass, watching helplessly as the man she'd fallen in love with was escorted back to his own cell. As she was led back through the detention center's corridors, past cells holding other supernatural prisoners whose crimes she could only guess at, Aria realized that their situation had moved far beyond academic scandal or even criminal conspiracy. This was about power, who had it, who wanted it, and what they were willing to do to keep others from threatening their control. And somewhere in the city beyond these walls, Serafina Darkmoor Wolfsbane was planning her next move, confident that she had eliminated the last obstacles to her family's continued dominance. She was wrong, but it would take more than legal maneuvering or federal cooperation to prove it. It would take the kind of revelations that could reshape the entire supernatural political landscape, revelations that Phoenix had been trying to share before their communication was cut short. In her cell that night, listening to the hum of power-suppressing wards and the distant sounds of other prisoners, Aria made a promise to herself and to the man she loved. Whatever secrets Phoenix carried, whatever truth Serafina was so desperate to keep hidden, she would uncover it, even if it destroyed her in the process. Chapter 12. The Bloodline Revelation. The revelation came not from Phoenix, whose communication privileges had been revoked after their monitored conversation, but from an unexpected source, a late-night visit from someone Aria had never expected to see again. Elena Moonwhisper stood in the detention center's visiting room at 2 a.m, her usual warm demeanor replaced by an urgency that set Aria's nerves on edge. The doctor had clearly called in significant favors to arrange this off-hours meeting, and the shadows under her eyes suggested she hadn't slept in days. Aria, dear, Elena said the moment they were connected through the monitored phone system, we need to discuss Professor Blackthorne's true identity, and we need to do it quickly. Events are moving faster than any of us anticipated. His true identity? Aria leaned forward, pressing closer to the glass barrier. Elena, what are you talking about? Phoenix Blackthorne isn't just a professor with revolutionary research, Elena said, her voice carefully modulated but carrying undertones of barely contained excitement. He's the lost heir to the Shadow Crown, the legitimate son of Alpha King Marcus Darkmoor. The words hit Aria like a physical blow. That's impossible. Serafina's father is Marcus Darkmoor, which would make Phoenix Serafina's half-brother, Elena confirmed grimly, and the rightful heir to the Alpha King's throne, if anyone could prove his legitimacy. Aria's mind reeled as pieces of a puzzle she hadn't even known existed began clicking into place. Phoenix's mysterious background, his reluctance to discuss his family, the way he'd spoken about doors that had closed permanently, it all made terrible sense now. How do you know this? She asked. Because I helped deliver him, Elena said quietly. 28 years ago, I was a young healer serving in the Royal Territories. Marcus Darkmoor had a secret affair with a woman named Isabella Blackthorne, a brilliant researcher from a minor pack who was working on mystical technological integration. Elena's voice took on the cadence of someone sharing a story she'd kept hidden for decades. When Isabella became pregnant, Marcus promised to acknowledge the child and make her his official mate. But his political advisors convinced him that marrying outside the major pack alliances would destabilize his rule. So he made a different choice. He married Serafina's mother for political advantage and cast Isabella aside. What happened to Phoenix's mother? She fled the Royal Territories before he was born, changed their names, and tried to build a new life far from supernatural politics. But Marcus's enemies discovered her location when Phoenix was still an infant. Elena's expression darkened with old grief. Isabella was murdered, supposedly by rogues, but everyone in the healing community knew it was an assassination designed to eliminate any future challenges to Marcus's rule. And Phoenix survived? He was raised by distant relatives who knew nothing of his true parentage, told that his parents had died in an accident. The only evidence of his royal bloodline was a birthmark that matches the ancient royal seal and certain, unique abilities that mark him as a true heir. Aria thought about Phoenix's silver eyes, so different from the typical golden amber of most werewolves. And his wolf form, the one she'd glimpsed the night he saved her from the rogues, midnight blue with silver markings, unlike anything she'd ever seen. The Volana wolves, she breathed. The rogues that attacked me, they mentioned Volana wolves. They said they were extinct. Not extinct, Elena corrected.
Hidden.
The Volana bloodline carries the genetic markers of the original werewolf royal family, the one that ruled before the current political system was established. Their wolves are different, larger, stronger, capable of abilities that regular werewolves can't match. Does Phoenix know? He's suspected for years, but never had proof. The abilities manifest differently in each generation, and without access to the royal genealogical records, confirmation was impossible. Elena leaned closer to the phone, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. But 3 days ago, Marcus received an anonymous package containing DNA evidence, genealogical documents, and Isabella Blackthorne's original research notes proving Phoenix's legitimate claim to succession. The implications crashed over Aria like a tidal wave. Serafina hadn't just been trying to eliminate a romantic rival or protect her family's business interests. She'd been trying to destroy the one person who could legally challenge her inheritance of supernatural political power. This is why the federal charges were so extreme, Aria realized. If Phoenix is proven to be the legitimate heir, it doesn't just threaten Serafina's position, it threatens the entire current power structure.
Exactly.
And if he's convicted of domestic terrorism, if his credibility is permanently destroyed, then even legitimate proof of his bloodline becomes irrelevant. No one follows a king who's been branded a traitor to his own people. Elena pulled a small device from her purse, something that looked like a combination of smartphone and mystical artifact. I'm uploading everything I have to your legal team's secure servers. Genealogical records, DNA analysis, Isabella Blackthorne's original research showing that Phoenix's work on mystical cybersecurity was actually a continuation of his mother's theories about supernatural human technological integration. Elena, if you're caught with this evidence, then I become another casualty in a war that's been going on since before you were born, Elena said firmly. But Phoenix is Isabella's son, and Isabella saved my life once during a pack conflict. I owe her this much, and more. The visiting room door opened, signaling the end of their allotted time. But as Elena prepared to leave, she delivered one final piece of information that changed everything. Aria, dear, there's one more thing you need to know. The anonymous package that was sent to Marcus Darkmoor? It came from inside the federal detention facility. Someone with access to this building, someone who's been watching and waiting for exactly the right moment to reveal Phoenix's true identity. Who? We don't know yet. But whoever they are, they're playing a game that's several moves ahead of everyone else, including Serafina. Elena's smile was grim but hopeful. The question is whether they're trying to save Phoenix or destroy him. As Aria was escorted back to her cell, her mind raced with possibilities. Phoenix was royal blood, the legitimate heir to a throne that Serafina had been raised to inherit. His research wasn't just academic work. It was a continuation of his mother's legacy, work that could revolutionize the relationship between supernatural and human societies. And somewhere in this detention facility, someone was playing chess with the fate of the entire supernatural political system. But the most staggering revelation was still processing in her mind. If Phoenix was Marcus Darkmoor's son, and Serafina was Marcus Darkmoor's daughter, then the woman who had destroyed Aria's relationship with Darian, orchestrated her academic downfall, and framed her for federal crimes was actually trying to eliminate her own half-brother. The scope of Serafina's cruelty was even more breathtaking than Aria had imagined. In her cell that night, as power-suppressing wards hummed around her and the weight of impossible secrets pressed down like a physical force, Aria realized that their situation had moved far beyond personal vendettas or academic politics. This was about the future of supernatural society itself, who would rule it, how it would evolve, and whether the rigid hierarchies that people like Serafina represented could survive in a world that increasingly demanded equality, transparency, and justice. The war for the Shadow Crown had begun. And somehow, without ever choosing to be, Aria Nightingale had become a key player in a conflict that would determine the fate of every supernatural being in North America. Outside her cell window, storm clouds gathered in the night sky, and in the distance, she could have sworn she heard the howl of wolves calling to their pack. The full moon was rising, and with it, changes that none of them could predict or control. Chapter 13. The Shadow Crown Awakens. The power outage hit the Federal Detention Center at 3:47 a.m., plunging the facility into darkness so complete that even supernatural senses struggled to penetrate it. Emergency lighting should have activated within seconds, but the backup systems remained dead, leaving hundreds of the most dangerous supernatural criminals in North America locked in cells that suddenly felt more like tombs. Aria pressed herself against the small window in her cell door, trying to make sense of the chaos erupting in the corridors beyond. Shouts echoed through the darkness, guards calling for backup, prisoners demanding answers, and underneath it all, a sound that made her blood run cold, the distinctive crack of mystical containment wards failing. Without the constant electrical current that powered the facility's supernatural suppression systems, every werewolf, vampire, witch, and other mystical being in the detention center was rapidly regaining their full abilities. In a building designed to hold creatures whose natural strength could tear through steel, that represented a catastrophic security failure. But what terrified Aria most was the possibility that this wasn't an accident. Everyone remains calm. A guard's voice boomed through the emergency communication system, though the strain in his tone suggested he was anything but calm himself. Lockdown protocols are in effect. All cell doors remain sealed until power is restored. That was when Aria heard something that made her heart stop, the soft click of electronic locks disengaging. Her cell door, along with every other door she could see down the corridor, had just unlocked. Aria? Marcus Shadowtail's voice came from across the hallway, confusion evident even in whispers. Are you seeing this? Before she could answer, emergency lighting finally flickered to life, casting everything in hellish red illumination. The corridor that had been empty moments before now held a figure that definitely hadn't been there when the lights went out. Phoenix stood in the middle of the hallway, but he looked nothing like the man she remembered. His eyes blazed with silver fire so intense it was visible even in the red emergency lighting, and his presence radiated power that made every supernatural instinct she possessed sit up and take notice. This wasn't the careful, controlled professor who had stolen her heart. This was something far more primal and infinitely more dangerous. Phoenix, she called softly, stepping out of her cell despite every rational thought telling her to stay put. He turned toward her voice, and she saw something in his expression that was part recognition, part confusion, and part something else entirely, as if he was looking at her through eyes that belonged to someone else. The bloodline awakening, he said, his voice deeper than she remembered, carrying harmonics that spoke of ancient power stirring after decades of dormancy. I can feel them, Aria. All of them. Every werewolf in the territory, every pack bond, every thread of supernatural connection. It's like I'm seeing the entire political structure from above for the first time. Phoenix, we need to get out of here, she said, moving closer despite the way her wolf was responding to his transformed presence with a mix of attraction and instinctive submission. Whatever's happening, this facility is going to be in chaos for hours. If we're going to escape, we're not escaping, he said, and there was something in his tone that brooked no argument. We're going home, to claim what's mine by right of blood and birth. Before she could ask what he meant, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the corridor. Multiple sets, moving with military precision despite the emergency conditions. Phoenix's head turned toward the sound, and she watched his nostrils flare as he caught scents that apparently told him everything he needed to know about their approaching visitors. Royal Guard, he said grimly. My dear half-sister has decided that subtle manipulation isn't working fast enough. The tactical team that rounded the corner was unlike any law enforcement Aria had ever seen. They moved with inhuman grace, their equipment combining cutting-edge technology with mystical enhancements, and every member radiated the kind of supernatural power that marked them as elite operatives rather than regular guards. Phoenix Blackthorne, the team leader, called out, his voice amplified by some kind of mystical enhancement. By order of Alpha King Marcus Darkmoor, you are commanded to surrender yourself for immediate transport to the royal territories. Commanded? Phoenix's laugh was rich with dark amusement. I think there's been some confusion about the chain of authority here. What happened next defied every law of physics and supernatural ability that Aria thought she understood. Phoenix didn't shift into his wolf form. Instead, his human form began to glow with the same silver light she'd seen in his eyes, and the very air around him started to shimmer with visible power. The royal guard raised weapons that hummed with mystical energy, but before they could fire, Phoenix gestured almost casually in their direction. Every piece of their equipment simply stopped working. Weapons powered down, armor systems failed, even their enhanced communication devices went silent. The Valana bloodline, one of the guards whispered, and Aria could hear genuine fear in his voice. The legends are true. He can disrupt any mystical construct just by willing it. Among other things, Phoenix said, stepping toward them with movements that were both graceful and menacing. Now, I suggest you return to my father with a message. Tell him that his bastard son is no longer content to hide in academic obscurity. Tell him that the rightful heir to the Shadow Crown is coming home, and that he'd better have very good explanations for what happened to my mother. The royal guards retreated, which should have been impossible for elite operatives facing a single unarmed opponent. But there was something in Phoenix's presence now that transcended normal concepts of threat assessment. He radiated authority on such a fundamental level that even trained killers found themselves unable to oppose him directly. As their footsteps faded, Phoenix turned back to Aria, and she saw that some of the terrible power had receded from his expression, though his eyes still blazed with silver fire. I'm sorry you had to see that, he said softly. The awakening, it's not entirely under my control yet. When the suppressors failed, when I could finally feel the full extent of what I really am. He shook his head. 28 years of living as half of myself, and now suddenly I'm whole. It's overwhelming. Phoenix, she said carefully, approaching him as she might approach a wounded predator. What exactly is the Shadow Crown? Elena mentioned it, but she didn't explain what it means. It's not a physical crown, he said, his voice taking on the cadence of someone sharing knowledge that had been hidden for generations. It's a mystical authority that exists in the bloodline itself. The power to command the loyalty of any supernatural being, to see and influence the connections between packs, to reshape the very structure of our society. He looked down at his hands, and she could see silver light playing beneath his skin like barely contained lightning. My mother's research wasn't just about mystical technological integration, Aria. She was studying the Shadow Crown itself, trying to understand why it had been dormant for so long, and what would be required to reawaken it. Serafina didn't just have me framed to protect her inheritance. She was trying to prevent the return of a form of supernatural authority that makes the current Alpha King system look like children playing dress-up. The implications were staggering. Phoenix wasn't just challenging Serafina's political position. He was potentially overthrowing the entire governmental structure that had ruled supernatural society for centuries. What happens now? She asked. Phoenix's smile was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. Now we go to war. Not with weapons or armies, but with truth. With the power that flows through every supernatural bloodline, calling them to remember what they really are beneath all the political conditioning. He held out his hand to her, and she could feel the power radiating from his skin like heat from a forge. Come with me, Aria. Help me reclaim what was stolen from my mother, what was stolen from every supernatural being who's been told they're not worthy of real freedom. Help me build something better than the system that tried to destroy us both. She looked at his outstretched hand, knowing that taking it would make her complicit in revolution and would mark her as an enemy to every established power in the supernatural world. She took his hand without hesitation. The moment their skin touched, silver fire raced through her nervous system, and suddenly she could feel what Phoenix felt. The vast network of supernatural connections spreading across the continent like a web of light. Every pact bond and territorial alliance laid bare before her enhanced perception. "Welcome to the real war," Phoenix said softly. "The one that's been building for centuries, waiting for someone with the power to finally fight it." As they walked toward the detention center's exit, doors opening before them without resistance, guards stepping aside as if compelled by forces they couldn't understand, Aria realized that everything she'd thought she knew about supernatural society was about to change. The Shadow Crown was awakening, and with it, a revolution that would reshape their entire world. Chapter 14: The Royal Awakening. The drive to the royal territories took place in a stolen federal transport vehicle that Phoenix had somehow convinced to unlock itself and start without keys. Aria didn't ask how. The Shadow Crown's awakening seemed to grant him abilities that defied conventional understanding of supernatural powers. What she did ask about, as they drove through the pre-dawn darkness toward a confrontation that could reshape their entire world, was what exactly they were walking into. "Marcus Darkmoor has ruled the supernatural territories for 35 years, Phoenix explained, his hand steady on the steering wheel despite the magnitude of what they were approaching. He consolidated power by playing the major pacts against each other, maintaining just enough conflict to prevent any unified opposition while positioning himself as the only source of stability. And you're going to challenge that directly? I'm going to offer an alternative." His silver eyes reflected the highway lights like mirrors. "The Shadow Crown doesn't rule through fear or political manipulation, Aria. It leads through genuine authority, the kind that makes people want to follow because they recognize something true and worthy in the leadership being offered." They drove in silence for several miles, both lost in their own thoughts about the impossible situation they were heading toward. Finally, Aria voiced the question that had been haunting her since the detention center. "Phoenix, what happens to us? I mean, assuming we survive whatever's waiting at the royal territories, assuming you somehow manage to claim your inheritance without starting a civil war, what happens to what we have together?" He was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that suggested he'd been wrestling with the same question. "The Shadow Crown comes with responsibilities I'm only beginning to understand," he said slowly. "Obligations to the supernatural community that will consume most of my time, attention, and energy. And there will be pressure to form political alliances through mating bonds with werewolves from major pack families. Like Seraphina? Like dozens of potential candidates who could strengthen various territorial alliances." He glanced at her, and she saw something in his expression that looked like pain. The rational choice, the politically advantageous choice, would be to find a mate whose family connections could help stabilize the transition of power. But I've already found my mate," he said simply. "And she's sitting in this vehicle with me, about to risk her life to help me reclaim a throne I never wanted, for the sake of supernatural beings who don't even know they need saving." The words hit her like a physical caress, warming something in her chest that had been cold since Darian's betrayal. But beneath the warmth was a current of realism that she couldn't ignore. "Phoenix, I'm nobody in supernatural politics. I have no pack connections, no territorial alliances, no political value whatsoever. If you're really going to be some kind of supernatural king, I'd be a liability as your mate." "You'd be my strength," he corrected firmly. "The person who chose to stand with me when I had nothing to offer but danger and uncertainty. The woman who saw value in Phoenix Blackthorne the professor before she knew anything about royal bloodlines or mystical crowns." Before she could respond, their destination appeared on the horizon, a complex of buildings that looked like someone had crossed a medieval castle with a modern corporate headquarters. The royal territories were surrounded by walls that hummed with mystical energy, and even from a distance, Aria could feel the weight of centuries of supernatural authority pressing against her consciousness. "Second thoughts?" Phoenix asked, noting her sharp intake of breath. Dozens, she admitted. But we've come this far. The gates to the royal territories stood open, which should have been their first warning that something was wrong. No guards challenged their approach. No mystical sensors scanned their vehicle for weapons or unwanted supernatural abilities. They drove through entrance protocols that should have required multiple checkpoints and security clearances, as if they were expected guests arriving for a dinner party. "This is a trap," Aria said, voicing what they both already knew. "Of course it is," Phoenix agreed cheerfully. "The question is whether it's Seraphina's trap, Marcus's trap, or someone else's entirely." The main courtyard of the royal territories was filled with werewolves, dozens of them, representing what looked like every major pack in North America. They stood in formal ranks, their postures suggesting this was some kind of official ceremony rather than a casual gathering. At the center of the assembly, on a raised platform that definitely hadn't been there the last time public photographs of the location had been published, stood Marcus Darkmoor himself. Aria had seen pictures of the Alpha King, but confronting his presence in person was an entirely different experience. He radiated authority on a level that made her wolf want to submit automatically, and his golden eyes held the kind of calculated intelligence that had kept him in power for over 3 decades. Beside him, in a position that clearly marked her as his chosen heir, stood Seraphina. She wore formal ceremonial robes that probably cost more than most people's annual income, and her expression was a masterpiece of serene confidence, the look of someone who knew exactly how the next few hours would unfold. "Phoenix." Marcus's voice carried across the courtyard with supernatural amplification, reaching every corner of the assembly. "My son, welcome home." The casual acknowledgement of their relationship sent ripples of shock through the assembled werewolves. Whatever they'd been expecting from this gathering, it apparently wasn't the Alpha King publicly claiming the bastard son he'd hidden for nearly 3 decades. Phoenix stepped out of their stolen vehicle, and immediately every supernatural being in the courtyard could feel the change in the air. The Shadow Crown's awakening had made him impossible to ignore. His presence commanded attention on such a fundamental level that even the most powerful alphas found themselves turning toward him automatically. "Marcus," Phoenix replied, his voice carrying easily despite having no mystical amplification. "Thank you for the warm welcome. I assume this reception committee is here to discuss my mother's murder and your illegal occupation of authority that belongs to the Volana bloodline?" The words fell into the assembled crowd like stones into still water, creating ripples of whispered conversations and shifting allegiances that Aria could actually see as supernatural beings began reconsidering their loyalties. "Your mother's death was a tragedy," Marcus said smoothly, "but hardly murder. Isabella chose to live outside pack protection, to raise her child away from the safety that his royal blood entitled him to. The rogues who killed her were acting without sanction from any legitimate authority. Convenient rogues who disappeared without a trace immediately after her death, leaving no evidence except the body of the woman who threatened your political legitimacy." Phoenix stepped closer to the platform, and Aria could see several of the assembled alphas unconsciously moving aside to give him clear passage. "But we're not here to relitigate ancient history, Marcus. We're here because the Shadow Crown has awakened, and with it, the true authority over supernatural governance. The Shadow Crown is a legend." Seraphina spoke for the first time, her voice carrying the kind of dismissive superiority that had made Aria's life hell for months. "A bedtime story told to cubs about the old days, before we learned to organize ourselves through rational political structures." "Is it?" Phoenix asked, and suddenly the silver fire in his eyes blazed bright enough to be visible even in the morning sunlight. "Then perhaps you'd like to explain why every werewolf in this courtyard is struggling with the compulsion to kneel?" Aria looked around and realized he was right. The assembled supernatural leaders, alphas who had never bowed to anyone except Marcus himself, were visibly fighting against some invisible force that wanted to drive them to their knees in acknowledgement of Phoenix's authority. Several of the younger ones had already lost the battle, dropping into positions of formal submission despite their obvious efforts to remain standing. Even Marcus himself was showing strain, his hands gripping the platform's railing as he resisted the pull of ancestral recognition. "Interesting trick," Seraphina said, though her voice was tighter than before. But raw power isn't the same as legitimate authority. You can force people to kneel, brother dear, but you can't force them to follow you willingly. Can't I? Phoenix smiled, and there was something in his expression that suggested Serafina had just walked into exactly the trap he'd been hoping for. Why don't we ask them? He turned to address the assembled werewolves directly, his voice carrying the kind of natural authority that needed no mystical enhancement. You've spent decades accepting a system that treats you like chess pieces in other people's political games, he said. Your territories are divided and controlled by families who inherited power rather than earning it. Your children's futures are determined by bloodline politics rather than individual merit. Your very nature as supernatural beings subordinated to human governmental structures that see you as threats to be managed rather than citizens to be respected. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd, and Aria could see the shift in their expressions as Phoenix's words resonated with frustrations they'd been carrying for years. I'm not here to seize power, Phoenix continued. I'm here to return it to where it belongs, with the supernatural communities themselves, governed by principles of merit and mutual support rather than inherited privilege and political manipulation. Pretty words, Marcus said, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. But what happens when human authorities decide that an independent supernatural government represents too great a threat to their own control? What happens when they stop viewing us as a curiosity to be regulated and start seeing us as an enemy to be eliminated? Then we deal with that threat as a united supernatural community, Phoenix replied, rather than as fractured packs competing for scraps of autonomy from human governmental systems that will never see us as equals. The philosophical debate might have continued for hours, but it was interrupted by the arrival of federal vehicles surrounding the courtyard. The trap within the trap was revealing itself. This gathering wasn't just about family drama or succession disputes. It was about something much larger and more dangerous. Agent Chin stepped out of the lead vehicle, flanked by what looked like an entire battalion of federal supernatural enforcement agents. Alpha King Marcus Darkmoor, she announced, her voice carrying official authority. You and your family are under arrest for conspiracy to commit treason against the United States government. As federal agents moved to surround the platform, Aria realized that the game had changed one final time. This wasn't about supernatural politics anymore. It was about the survival of their entire species in a world that had apparently decided they represented too great a threat to be allowed to continue existing. The revolution Phoenix had wanted to start was about to become a war for the right to exist at all. Chapter 15. The Shadow Crown Rises. The federal agents moved with military precision, but they hadn't accounted for one crucial factor: a courtyard full of the most powerful supernatural beings in North America who suddenly found themselves faced with a choice between surrender and extinction. Stand down, Agent Chin commanded, her weapon trained on Marcus despite the dozens of werewolves who could have torn her apart before she could pull the trigger. Any resistance will be met with lethal force. Lethal force against American citizens exercising their constitutional right to peaceful assembly? Phoenix's voice carried across the courtyard with crystalline clarity, and Aria watched as his words hit the assembled supernatural leaders like electric shocks. Agent Chen, I think you'll find that your authority here is somewhat limited. What happened next would be debated in supernatural political circles for decades to come. Phoenix didn't transform, didn't attack, didn't even raise his voice. Instead, he simply extended his consciousness outward, touching every supernatural mind present, and shared something that changed everything: the truth. Not his truth, not Marcus's truth, but the objective reality of their situation laid bare through the mystical connections that linked every werewolf bloodline. In that moment of shared consciousness, every person in the courtyard experienced the full scope of the conspiracy against them: the federal surveillance programs, the planned containment facilities, the legislative proposals that would strip supernatural beings of basic civil rights. The government agents weren't here to arrest criminals. They were here to begin the systematic elimination of an entire species. You knew, Alpha James Ironwood said to Marcus, his voice carrying the kind of quiet fury that preceded violence. You knew they were planning this, and you said nothing to the rest of us. I was trying to negotiate a peaceful resolution, Marcus replied, but his words sounded hollow even to his own ears. Accommodation, integration, finding ways to coexist. By sacrificing Phoenix and Aria as proof of our compliance with human authority, Serafina finished, her golden eyes blazing with something that might have been admiration for her half-brother's strategic thinking. Frame them as domestic terrorists, let the federal government eliminate the most dangerous supernatural bloodline, and hope they'd be satisfied with that offering. It would have worked, Agent Chin said coldly, apparently deciding that subtlety was no longer necessary. If your bastard prince hadn't developed abilities that make him a clear and present danger to national security. The Shadow Crown isn't just political authority, it's a weapon capable of controlling every supernatural being on the continent. Controlling? Phoenix laughed, and the sound carried no humor whatsoever. Agent Chin, you fundamentally misunderstand what the Shadow Crown represents. It doesn't control anyone. It simply removes the artificial barriers that prevent supernatural beings from recognizing their own strength. He gestured toward the assembled werewolves, and Aria could feel the shift in their collective consciousness as old fears and conditioned limitations fell away like discarded clothes. You've spent so long being told that you need human permission to exist, human oversight to govern yourselves, human approval to live as the magnificent creatures you were born to be. But what happens when you remember that you're faster, stronger, smarter, and more adaptable than any human authority? What happens when you stop asking for permission and start taking what's rightfully yours? The change in the assembled supernatural beings was visible, tangible, and utterly terrifying from the federal agent's perspective. Postures straightened, eyes began to glow with inner fire, and the air itself seemed to thicken with barely contained power. This is your last warning, Agent Chin said, but her voice had lost its earlier confidence. Disperse immediately or face the consequences. No, Phoenix said simply. I think it's time you face some consequences instead. What followed wasn't a battle in any traditional sense. The federal agents had weapons, training, and the backing of the most powerful government on Earth. But they were humans facing creatures of myth and legend who had finally stopped pretending to be anything less than what they truly were. It was over in minutes. No one was killed. Phoenix's influence seemed to extend to restraint as well as revolution, but every federal agent found themselves disarmed, zip-tied with their own equipment, and seated in a neat row while supernatural leaders debated what to do with them. We could send a message, one of the younger alphas suggested, his eyes still glowing with transformation energy. Show the human government exactly what happens when they threaten our families. And prove their point about us being dangerous monsters? Elena Moonwhisper had arrived at some point during the chaos, along with what looked like representatives from dozens of smaller packs. Violence isn't the answer here, despite how satisfying it might feel. Then what is the answer? Marcus asked, and for the first time since Aria had known of his existence, the Alpha King sounded genuinely uncertain. Phoenix walked over to Agent Chin, who was sitting with her fellow prisoners but maintaining eye contact with defiant stubbornness. The answer, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, is simple. We will stop hiding. He pulled out his phone. Apparently the Shadow Crown's awakening came with the ability to make even federal-grade communication scramblers irrelevant, and activated what looked like a live streaming application. Ladies and gentlemen of North America, he began, addressing the camera with the same natural authority he'd once used in university lectures. My name is Phoenix Blackthorne, and I have something important to tell you about your neighbors. Over the next 20 minutes, while federal agents sat helpless and supernatural leaders watched in amazement, Phoenix did something that no one in their community's history had ever attempted. He told the entire truth. About werewolves living among humans for centuries, contributing to society while hiding their nature. About the systematic surveillance and planned persecution that had brought them to this moment. About the choice that now faced both communities. Coexistence based on mutual respect, or conflict that would benefit no one. But most importantly, he talked about love. About Aria, about their journey from academic scandal to revolutionary partnership, about the power of connection that transcended species boundaries and political divisions. The woman standing beside me, he said, Gesturing toward Aria, who is still processing the surreal nature of having her love life broadcast to millions of viewers, was rejected by someone who should have treasured her, persecuted by authorities who should have protected her, and faced with choices that no one should ever have to make. But she chose love over fear, truth over safety, and hope over despair. He took her hand, and she felt the familiar electric tingle of connection that had drawn them together from their first meeting. If a werewolf professor and his brilliant student can find something worth fighting for together, then maybe our two species can figure out how to share this world without destroying each other in the process. The live stream ended with Phoenix's formal challenge to every human governmental authority, negotiations within 30 days for a new framework of supernatural human coexistence, or the wholesale withdrawal of supernatural cooperation from human society. "You're talking about supernatural secession," Agent Chin said, apparently finding her voice again. "Economic disruption, social chaos, possible civil war." "I'm talking about equality," Phoenix corrected. "The same rights and responsibilities that every other American citizen enjoys, without the surveillance, containment, and persecution that your agencies have been planning." As federal reinforcements arrived to collect their captured agents, who were released unharmed as a gesture of good faith, the assembled supernatural leaders began the work of building something that had never existed before. A unified supernatural government capable of negotiating with human authorities as equals rather than subjects. Marcus formally abdicated his throne, passing the shadow crown to Phoenix in a ceremony that combined ancient tradition with live-streamed transparency. Serafina, to everyone's surprise, pledged her loyalty to her half-brother's vision, apparently deciding that being part of a supernatural revolution was more appealing than maintaining the status quo. "What happens now?" Aria asked Phoenix as they watched the sun set over the royal territories, now transformed into the capital of something unprecedented in supernatural history. "Now we build something better," he said, pulling her closer as they stood on the balcony of what had once been Marcus's private quarters. "A society that values merit over bloodline, cooperation over competition, love over politics." "And us?" she asked. "What happens to us in all this nation-building?" His answer came in the form of a kiss that tasted like promises and possibilities, like the future they'd chosen to create together despite every force that had tried to tear them apart. "Us," he said against her lips, "is the foundation everything else gets built on. The proof that different doesn't mean incompatible, that love can overcome any obstacle, that sometimes the best way to change the world is to start with changing your own life." 3 months later, the first formal treaty between the United Supernatural Territories and the United States government was signed in a ceremony attended by representatives from both species. The negotiations had been difficult, sometimes heated, but ultimately successful in creating a framework for coexistence that respected the rights and concerns of both communities. And in a private ceremony attended only by their closest friends and family, Professor Phoenix Blackthorne, now formally recognized as the first elected leader of the Supernatural Territories, married Dr. Aria Nightingale Blackthorne, whose groundbreaking research in mystical cybersecurity had become the foundation for the new society's technological infrastructure. Their love story, broadcast to the world during those revolutionary weeks, had become a symbol of hope for anyone who believed that different kinds of people could find common ground, build something beautiful together, and change the world in the process. As they danced at their wedding reception, surrounded by friends who had once been enemies and allies who had once been strangers, Aria reflected on how far they'd both come from that night when her world had shattered in a nightclub's VIP section. Sometimes the greatest love stories began with the worst betrayals, and sometimes the most beautiful futures grew from the most painful pasts. But always, they began with the courage to believe that love was worth fighting for, no matter what forces stood in its way. The end.